Chapter 2709. The Vajra puppets didn't know fear. They only obeyed orders. When they heard Great Emperor Heaven Punisher's order to attack, they charged at Ji Tianxing and the others fearlessly. Swish, swish, swish. The 81 Vajra puppets spread out and formed a huge encirclement around Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and the others. They released invisible divine soul blades and attacked the group with their fists and feet. The Brahma race cultivators who practiced the Brahma Gang divine path not only had powerful divine souls, but their physical strength and defense were also very strong. Ji Tianxing knew how powerful it was. Without any hesitation, he released his spiritual power and formed an invisible shield that covered an area of 100 miles. Bang, 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 bang. Thousands of divine soul blades slammed into the divine soul light shield, causing a series of loud noises. Everyone was safe and sound. They were not harmed at all. However, the Vajra puppets rushed over and their giant fists and feet enlarged in everyone's eyes. Ji Tianxing waved the sword of burial of heaven emotionlessly and slashed at the Vajra puppets with 81 golden light swords. Yin Yao, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts also used their divine spells to fight back. Boom, 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 boom. The divine blades of light that blotted out the sky collided with the Vajra puppet, causing a massive explosion. Countless light blades were shattered into millions of pieces, scattering in the void. The 81 Vajra puppets were all knocked back. However, most of the Vajra puppets were unharmed and had withstood the attacks of Bai Long and the 4 divine beasts. Only the 18 Vajra puppets were severely injured after being hit by Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. Their giant bodies were full of holes and holes. 5 of the Vajra puppets were in the worst condition. They were cut into 8 pieces by the sword auras and fell into the air. Even so, the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher was heartbroken and his face darkened. Damn it, I spent a lot of time collecting those Vajra puppets from the entire Brahma Gang planet zone. I spent a lot of effort and resources to make them into Vajra puppets. That goddamn Ji Tianxing actually killed 5 people in one move? To Emperor Tian Fa, the 81 Vajra puppets were his best work. They were powerful and terrifying killing machines. Not only did he want to use these Vajra puppets to kill Ji Tianxing, but he also wanted to use them to conquer the universe and crush the various major star fields. But now, it seemed like his plan was about to be destroyed. Kill him. Emperor of Heaven Extermination roared anxiously and furiously. He ordered the 3 marshals and dozens of generals to attack Ji Tianxing. At the same time, he also took out a 3-meter-long pitch-black saber and jumped into the battlefield to kill Ji Tianxing. Even the battleship under his feet had activated 300 divine cannons, shooting out dazzling purple light beams that locked onto Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and the others. Boom, 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 boom. 300 purple light pillars poured down, drowning the figures of Ji Tianxing and the others. Emperor of Heaven Extermination, the 3 marshals, and the generals attacked without any regard for their own safety. The 70-odd Vajra puppets also attacked without any fear of death. Instantly, the figures of Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and the others were drowned by the divine light that blotted out the sky. They were like a small boat in the middle of the ocean that was about to sink under the waves. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing stepped forward. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and stabbed forward. Sword piercing heaven. Endless divine light burst out from the sword of burial of heaven and formed a giant golden sword that was 100 miles long. It instantly destroyed the purple light that filled the sky. A few Vajra puppets and the 4 generals in golden armor were also unlucky enough to be stabbed by the giant sword. Their bodies exploded into pieces and they died instantly. A huge gap was created in the divine skill that blotted out the sky and earth. A huge crack was also torn in the encirclement formed by the Heaven Extermination elites. Let's go, Ji Tianxing shouted. He quickly led Yin Yao, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts out of the gap. He was powerful enough to ignore the attacks of the Heaven Extermination elites and the Vajra puppets. However, by long, and the four divine beasts were not as powerful as him. If he was trapped and couldn't break through the encirclement, he would be severely injured or even killed on the spot. Therefore, he had to lead the others out of the encirclement and then fight with the heaven extermination elites. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, Tianxing and the others had broken through the encirclement and teleported into the vast sky. Many heaven extermination elites and the Vajra puppets chased after them with murderous intent. These people were in a mess, and there was no formation to speak of. Tianxing took the opportunity to attack Emperor of Heaven Extermination and the three marshals with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. At the same time, he didn't forget to send a message to Yun Yao, Bai Long, and the four divine beasts. Try to deal with them. Don't fight them head-on, in case you are trapped and can't escape. Everyone understood what he meant. They immediately dispersed and scattered in the void within a radius of 10,000 miles. The Heaven Extermination elites and the Vajra puppets also split into 7 groups and attacked Tianxing, Yun Yao, Bai Long, and the four divine beasts. Therefore, the pressure on everyone was greatly reduced. Each person and each divine beast only had to deal with 20 enemies. Tianxing took most of the pressure. Even Emperor of Heaven Extermination's battleship had locked onto Tianxing and kept shooting at him. Boom, boom, boom. Another 300 purple light beams shot toward Tianxing with destructive power. Not far from him, Emperor of Heaven Extermination and the 3 marshals swung their swords and charged toward him with murderous intent. In the void to the left and right, more than a dozen heaven-defying generals and 9 Vajra puppets also launched attacks without fear of death. Facing the attacks, Tianxing didn't panic at all. He was still calm. He used the dragon elephant fist with his left hand, and a mountainous shadow of a dragon elephant broke the 300 purple light beams. He held the Sword of Burial of Heaven in his right hand and swung in the air. Hundreds of golden sword auras shot toward the generals of Heaven Extermination and the Vajra puppets. Boom, 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 crack, crack. With a series of loud bangs and shattering sounds, half of the more than 20 generals of the Heaven Punishing Army and the Vajra puppets were cut into pieces. The other half were also severely injured by the sword auras. They flew back with blood spurting out of their bodies. At the same time, Emperor of Heaven Extermination held the divine blade with both hands and slashed a giant purple light beam toward Tianxing's head. Tianxing roared as his body emitted a golden light that soared into the sky. He used the ultimate skill of the celestial dragon tyrant body and instantly turned into a 3,000-meter-tall, golden-armored giant. He held the Heaven Burier sword with both hands and raised it above his head, blocking the great Emperor Tian Fa's attack. Clang! An earth-shattering explosion erupted, shaking the void for tens of thousands of miles. The violent impact made Tianxing's body tremble. He took a dozen steps back before he could steady himself. But he was unharmed. The sharp blades of divine light released by the 3 marshals also hit him, but they didn't cause any damage at all. At this moment, Tianxing was like a god that had descended from the heavens, a god of war that had descended upon the mortal world. He was extremely powerful. End of chapter. Chapter 2710. Tianxing didn't hold back at all. He unleashed all his power, which was comparable to a LV-4 heavenly god. After using the ultimate skill of the celestial dragon tyrant body, his strength and defense soared to a terrifying level. He was already in an invincible position. Moreover, he had merged with the 5 elements world, which made him immortal. No matter how the Emperor of Heaven Punishing, the 3 marshals, the generals of Heaven Punishing, and the Vajra puppets attacked him, they couldn't hurt him at all. Bang, bang, bang. Purple phantoms and sharp blades filled the sky as they landed on his body, one after another, with the power to destroy everything. However, he wasn't afraid at all. Golden light flashed all over his body. He shook his body a few times and shattered everyone's attacks. Apart from the Emperor of Heaven Punishing, who could pose a slight threat to him, he ignored all the other divine skills. However, the fist radiance, leg radiance, and sword radiance that he threw out with every move were fatal. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens of dazzling sword radiance mixed with lightning fell on the crowd. Instantly, a few more generals of heaven punishing and Vajra puppets were smashed into pieces and turned into ashes. Ji Tianxing used the 10 directional vanishing shadows again, and his body turned into 10 phantoms as he rushed into the crowd and started a massacre. Bang, bang, bang. Fist radiance, leg radiance, and sword radiance filled the sky. They exploded in the crowd with deafening sounds. More than a dozen generals of heaven punishing and Vajra puppets were smashed into pieces. They died on the spot. Even the 3 marshals couldn't withstand his head-on attack. They were sent flying again. After the 2 sides fought for 10 breaths of time, the void that was originally filled with people became empty. 20 generals of heaven punishing and 18 Vajra puppets had all been killed by Ji Tianxing. Only the Emperor of Heaven punishing and the 3 marshals were left. They were still fighting fiercely with Ji Tianxing. However, the 3 marshals were also covered in wounds and blood. They were greatly weakened. Even the Emperor of Heaven punishing was injured. He was in a sorry state. The 9 heavens' everlasting golden crown on his head had been shattered by Ji Tianxing. It fell into the sky. Her long purple hair hung loosely over her shoulders, covering half of her face. The cloak and armor he was wearing had also been slashed by the sword light and were in tatters. However, the more Ji Tianxing fought, the more ferocious he became, and the more violent he became. He was like a blazing golden sun, rampaging through the void, and no one could stop him. The 3 marshals had just charged forward when they were sent flying by him. Great Emperor Tian Fa's ultimate move was shattered by Qinan's fists and sent flying with a kick. Lunatic! That damn beast, he's gone mad. Emperor Tian Fa was both furious and ashamed. He cursed at the top of his lungs. He turned his head to look at the void behind him and roared at the soldiers in the warship. A bunch of useless trash. Didn't I tell you to lock onto Ji Tianxing and kill him at all costs? The dozens of golden-armored captains on the battleship suddenly had a sullen expression on their faces, unable to voice out their grievances. Everyone felt helpless as they began to mutter in their hearts. Great Emperor, can't you see that we've been firing nonstop? But Ji Tianxing's speed is too fast. He's dodged most of the divine cannons that we've fired. Even if some of the divine cannons hit him, they're like tickles to him. They're not lethal at all. It's not that we're not trying our best. The enemy is just too powerful. Your Majesty, that Ji Tianxing is obviously a deity who has descended to the mortal world. Why do we have to risk our lives fighting against him? Of course, they could only think about it in their hearts. They did not dare to say it out loud. Everyone knew that great Emperor Tian Fa was in a fit of rage and had nowhere to vent his anger and humiliation. Anyone who dared to get close to him would be courting death. Soon, the captains gathered their thoughts and focused on piloting the battleship. They continued to fire at Ji Tianxing. Boom, 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 whoosh, 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 whoosh. The purple light pillars that covered the sky rained down on Ji Tianxing's body. In less than 15 minutes, the battleship had been firing at Ji Tianxing nonstop. It had consumed more resources than conquering a planet. Ji Tianxing had been attacking ferociously. He wanted to kill the 3 marshals and capture Great Emperor Tian Fa as soon as possible. However, Great Emperor Tian Fa's battleship had locked onto him and was firing at him relentlessly. This restricted his movements and restricted his movements. Finally, Ji Tianxing was enraged. He had given up on Great Emperor Tian Fa and the 3 marshals and turned around to charge at the heaven-sundering battleship. Whoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianxing used the law of space and teleported himself 1,000 miles away. He appeared above the heaven-sundering battleship. The captains on the battleship were shocked. They hurriedly piloted the battleship to escape. Great Emperor Tian Fa, who was 1,000 miles away, was also shocked. He let out a cry of anger. No, Ji Tianxing is a bastard. He wants to destroy my battleship. When Great Emperor Tian Fa had invaded the 5 Elements world, he had been severely injured by Ji Tianxing. His god-level battleship had also been destroyed. After escaping back to Planet Heaven FA, he had ordered the craftsmen of the Heaven-Sundering race to build a true god-level battleship as quickly as possible. It was impossible to build another true god-level battleship. Without the blessing of the upper world's deities, the craftsmen of the Heaven-Sundering race could not do it. Therefore, this supreme-grade, true, god-level battleship was one of Great Emperor Tian Fa's most important divine weapons. However, this battleship was about to be destroyed. Ji Tianqing, who was 1,000 feet tall, stood on the battleship like a mountain. He held the 8,000-foot-long barrel of heaven sword with both hands and swung it down with all his might. Kaboom! With an earth-shaking boom, the Heaven Barrier sword struck the Heaven-Sundering warship. Purple light and metal shards that blotted out the sky burst out. Under Great Emperor Tian Fa's furious gaze and the dozens of captains' faces filled with despair, the Heaven-Sundering battleship was cut in half. The destructive impact tore countless cracks and holes in the battleship that had been cut in half. Billions of pieces burst out and formed a terrifying hurricane in the void. More than 100 martial God Realm Great Emperor guards were blasted into minced meat on the spot. Almost half of the captains who were controlling the battleship were killed in an instant. None of them had a complete corpse. More than 20 captains who were lucky enough to survive saw the wreckage of the battleship fall into the void and burst into flames. They quickly abandoned the battleship and fled. However, as soon as they escaped into the void, they were met with a calamity. Ji Tianqing, who was like a god of war, swung his sword and sent out dozens of sword gleams. They fell from the sky and attacked. The martial god realm captains were unable to dodge or defend themselves. They were immediately killed by the sword gleams. Next, Ji Tianqing swung his sword a few more times and cut 2 more pieces of the battleship into pieces. Great Emperor Tian Fa's battleship was completely destroyed. It turned into billions of pieces of scrap metal and metal that scattered in the void. The Heaven-Sundering race guards who had been hiding in the wreckage of the battleship all died without a burial place. Great Emperor Tian Fa witnessed this with his own eyes. He was so furious that he was about to explode. Chapter 27:11. Heavenly God, who else can stop that bastard, Ji Tianqing? The Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher looked into the sky and could not help but roar. As the leader of the Heaven Punisher, he had the strength of a half-step heavenly god and the ambition to conquer all 3,000 worlds. However, he had been defeated here. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless and hopeless. Ji Tianqing was so powerful that it had completely exceeded his expectations and imagination. At this moment, he did not know what to do to kill Ji Tianqing. No, he no longer dared to hope that he could kill Ji Tianqing. He only hoped that the situation would turn around so that he could stop the unruly Ji Tianqing. Therefore, he turned his head to look into the distance to check if the generals of Heaven Punishing and the Vajra puppets had killed Ji Tianqing's companions. If he could capture Yin Yao or Bai Long, he would have the right to negotiate with Ji Tianqing. However, when he saw the situation in the distance, his face turned even darker. Originally, there were more than 100 generals of Heaven Punishing and the Vajra puppets attacking Yin Yao, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts in 6 groups. Now, Yin Yao, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts were only slightly injured. They were still alive and kicking. On the other hand, more than half of the generals of Heaven Punishing and the Vajra puppets had been killed. Only about 40 of them were still fighting a bloody battle. They were desperately attacking Yin Yao and the others. However, the generals of Heaven Punishing and the Vajra puppets were also badly injured. Their strength was weakening rapidly. The Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher was a peerless powerhouse. He had sharp eyes. Of course, he could see that they were going to lose. The generals of Heaven Punishing and the Vajra puppets would not be able to hold on for long. They would be killed by Yin Yao and the others. By then, the Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher would only have 3 marshals left. At the thought of this, the Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher felt a chill run down his spine. He secretly released his divine consciousness to check the situation around him. He was already plotting how to escape. Ji Tianxing's two companions and four mythological beasts are currently surrounded and fighting fiercely. They definitely have no time to care about anything else. I just need to keep an eye on Ji Tianxing. When he's not paying attention, I'll have a chance to leave this place. Martial Emperor Tian soon made up his mind. Seeing Ji Tianxing dashing over from 1,000 miles away with the sword of burial of heaven, he growled with a strong, killing intent. Stop him. The three marshals were all heavily injured, but their fighting spirit was still high and they refused to submit. When they heard Emperor Tian's order, they charged at Ji Tianxing with their weapons in hand without any hesitation. They released purple divine light that covered the sky and earth. Swish, swish. Hundreds of dazzling purple divine light blades slashed toward Ji Tianxing with destructive power. At the same time, Great Emperor Tian unleashed all his divine power. He held the purple divine saber with both hands and executed his ultimate move. Heaven defeating slash. The 3-foot-long purple divine saber released endless dark purple divine light. It slashed out 900-mile-long light blades. Swish, swish, swish. Each purple light blade was like a terrifying purple dragon. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they charged toward Ji Tianxing. Its power was extremely fierce and unparalleled. It was enough to tear the sky apart and destroy the land within 10,000 miles. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing had once used the same technique on a certain planet. When the 9 purple dragon saber lights slashed down, they destroyed 200,000 miles of land and killed more than a dozen martial gods and almost 100,000 alien race cultivators. 200,000 miles of land turned into scorched ruins. The sky collapsed. That scene was truly earth-shattering. It was as if the end of the world had come. But now, Emperor Tian didn't expect to kill Ji Tianxing with this move. He only hoped to injure Ji Tianxing and stall him for a while. That was the only way Great Emperor Tian was confident that he could escape. It looked like the 9 purple saber lights and the attacks of the 3 marshals were about to engulf Ji Tianxing like a surging flood. Great Emperor Tian used the teleportation technique and was about to escape 1,000 miles away. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing decisively swung his sword and unleashed 3 cold light blades at the 3 marshals. Swish, swish, swish. The 3 dazzling rays of cold light flashed in the void for a moment before disappearing. In the next second, the 3 cold lights appeared a few hundred miles away. They exploded in front of the 3 marshals with blinding light. Boom, boom, boom. 3 balls of white divine light exploded. They soared into the sky like 3 giant mushroom clouds. The 3 marshals' muscular bodies were immediately blasted into pieces. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. The anger and murderous intent on their faces froze. Their eyes widened in shock, revealing looks of horror and disbelief. They couldn't understand how Ji Tianxing was able to use such a strange sword technique. Even when they were on high alert, he was still able to stab them and destroy their bodies from a distance. This was definitely one of the most mysterious assassination techniques in the world. However, the 3 marshals did not have time to think. Their bodies exploded. Their divine souls were also severely injured. Their consciousness became blurry. His burly body turned into pieces of flesh and blood that splattered in the void. Fortunately, their life force was strong enough. Even though their bodies had been blasted into pieces, they were still alive. There was still hope for survival. However, they knew that Ji Tianxing would never let them go. In the next second, Ji Tianxing would turn their flesh and blood into dust. They would die completely. However, the 3 marshals had guessed wrong. Ji Tianxing did not chase after them. He disappeared from the sky with a flash of white light. In the next second, he teleported 1,500 miles away and appeared in another place. Almost at the same time, the void not far away from him lit up with purple light. Whoosh! The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer appeared out of nowhere. He also used his teleportation divine art and teleported 1,000 miles away, escaping to this void. Great Emperor Tian Fa had just finished teleporting. Before he could celebrate, he saw Ji Tianqing looking at him with a cold smile on his face. "Ha, our battle has just begun, and you want to run away? Aren't you in too much of a hurry?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked mockingly. The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer froze. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His eyes were filled with shock. "You? How could you?" The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer was stunned. He could not believe what he had just seen. Ji Tianqing finished his sentence and said mockingly, "You must be wondering how I knew you were going to run away and how I predicted the direction you would run in. Ha. I told you that this is the difference between the weak and the strong. Your schemes, plans, and thoughts are all within my expectations. Don't waste your energy. Accept your fate." The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer was so embarrassed that he almost vomited blood. He roared in a hoarse voice, "Don't even think about it. Even if I have to die with you, I will never bow down to you." As he spoke, he used his teleportation ability again and teleported thousands of miles into the depths of the dark and empty void. However, just as he teleported 1,000 miles away, Ji Tianqing caught up with him and appeared beside him. "Go ahead and run. If you can get away, I will admit defeat." Ji Tianqing looked at him with a smile and spoke in a disdainful tone. Chapter 27:12. Humiliation. This was a great humiliation. The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. He glared at Ji Tianqing with bloodshot eyes, and his body was burning with dark purple flames. "Ji Tianqing, you be asterisk-starred. Be asterisk-starred. Who do you think I am? How dare you mock and blaspheme me? I swear that I will grind your bones to dust and drag out your divine soul to torture for 10,000 years." Ji Tianqing sneered even more mockingly. "Why wait? I want to see how you're going to grind my bones to dust today." "You." The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of purple blood. "You be asterisk-starred. You will die a horrible death." The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer had never been so humiliated in his life, and he had never hated anyone so much. Ji Tianqing had successfully made him experience the extreme of anger and humiliation. However, there was nothing he could do. He didn't want to argue with Ji Tianqing anymore. He turned his anger into power and teleported away. Swoosh! There was a flash of purple light, and the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer appeared in the void 1,000 miles away. He had just teleported away when Ji Tianqing appeared not far away from him. The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer was both shocked and furious. He used his teleportation skill again and teleported 1,000 miles away. However, the result was the same. There was a flash of white light, and Ji Tianqing appeared next to him again. He looked at him with a faint smile. Swoosh! The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer gritted his teeth and teleported 1,000 miles away again. However, Ji Tianqing immediately caught up with him, following him like a shadow. In just 10 breaths, the two of them had teleported 10 times in the void. Ji Tianqing was still expressionless. His divine power was stable and vigorous. However, the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer could not take it anymore. His entire face turned purple. Phew! Phew! He was panting violently. The blood in his body was boiling, and his consciousness was somewhat blurred and dizzy. Even though he had reached the half-step to the divine realm, his divine power and body were extremely strong. However, he hadn't grasped the law of space, so he couldn't withstand the backlash of teleporting more than 10 times in a row. His entire body felt like it was being torn apart. Even his god soul and consciousness had cracks. He could not suppress the rampaging divine power in his body. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianqing and saw Ji Tianqing looking at him calmly with a mocking expression. Ji Tianqing had no intention of attacking. He was just like a cat playing with a mouse. He wanted to force him into a corner and make him surrender in despair. Damn beast! Not only has he mastered the power of space, but his divine body and divine power are also 10 times stronger than mine. If we continue to chase like this, I won't be able to withstand the backlash of tearing the space apart. Soon I will explode and die, but he will be fine. Emperor Tian Fa glared at Ji Tianxing with hatred in his eyes. He panted and thought to himself, I can't continue like this. I can only use that trump card. With that thought in mind, a dark golden bone appeared in the sleeve of the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer's robe. The bone was about the size of a palm, but it was broken and incomplete. 3 broken fingers were connected by broken joints. It was obviously not a human's finger. It had a metallic luster and contained a mysterious power. The mysterious bone was covered in cracks and filled with an ancient aura. Emperor Tian Fa had found it when he was exploring a secret realm in the Earth's core on the main planet of a certain star zone. There was no doubt that it was the bone of a god that had been left behind in the ancient times. After Emperor Tian Fa had obtained it, he had studied it for a long time and discovered that the bone had a special effect. That was, it could travel through space and teleport over long distances. He thought that the owner of the bone must have been a heaven god who had mastered the law of space. Emperor Tian Fa had rarely used the bone of the heaven god, because no one could force him to flee in a panic. Now, the bone of the heaven god finally came in handy. Emperor Tian Fa activated his divine power without hesitation and poured it into the bone of the heaven god. The dark golden bone of the heaven god immediately became crystal clear and shone with a dazzling white light. Whoosh! In an instant, the white light swallowed him up and he disappeared into the void. The vast white light brought him 90,000 miles away and shook off Ji Tianxing instantly. Whoosh! Emperor Tian Fa reappeared 90,000 miles away in a flash of white light. He looked around instinctively. When he saw that Ji Tianxing had not followed him, he sneered smugly. Ha ha! You little be*starred. Let's see how you'll catch up to me this time. Emperor Tian Fa heaved a sigh of relief. He looked down at the bone of the heaven god in his hand and smiled happily. Luckily, I have this bone of the ancient heaven god. That's why I can. Huh? Why is the bone of the heaven god broken? Emperor Tian Fa suddenly realized that the cracked bone of the heaven god had broken into dozens of pieces. His smile froze on his face. He shook his hand, and the dozens of pieces turned into dust and scattered in the void. Maybe I was too impatient and used up its remaining power. That's why it broke. What a pity. Emperor Tian Fa thought for a moment and guessed the reason. He was filled with regret. However, he waved his hand and scattered the dark golden dust. He mumbled to himself, Forget it. This bone of the heaven god has helped me escape. I've already done my job. If it's broken, then so be it. I'll get better divine items in the future. Emperor Tian Fa comforted himself, and the displeasure in his heart disappeared. He tidied his messy hair and was about to take out a small flying boat to fly into the depths of the void. Although his flying boat was not with him, he had many divine items in his infinite space ring. Among them were a dozen flying divine items. They were all upper-grade, true god treasures that he had made himself. He usually used them to reward his soldiers. However, before he could take out his flying boat, a white light shone in the void beside him. Whoosh! There was a flash of white light, and a young human in a white robe appeared before him. There was no doubt that it was Ji Tianxing. Emperor Tian Fa's body froze. His eyes were as cold as ice, and his face was contorted. You bastard who just won't leave. How did you catch up with me? Emperor Tian Fa was shocked and furious. He was about to lose his mind. He had sacrificed a piece of the heaven god's fingerbone to escape 90,000 miles away. He thought that he had gotten rid of Ji Tianxing. However, he did not expect that Ji Tianxing would catch up with him in the blink of an eye. Was there any justice in this world? Ji Tianxing, what the hell are you? How did you teleport 90,000 miles away? Emperor Tian Fa, where did you get this infinite space divine item? Let me have a look. Ji Tianxing smiled mockingly. As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed at Emperor Tian Fa. The time had come. Emperor Tian Fa's divine power was about to run out. He had used up all his trump cards. This time, Emperor Tian Fa had nowhere to run. Chapter 27:13. Ji Tianxing, you've gone too far. I'm going to kill you." Seeing Ji Tianxing's outstretched hand, the Emperor of Heaven Punisher roared angrily and swung his saber. He had no more trump cards and knew that he could not escape from Ji Tianxing's pursuit. He could only fight to the death with Ji Tianxing while he still had some divine power left. That was the only way he could survive. After all, Ji Tianxing had just teleported 90,000 miles away. No matter what superpower he used, it would consume a lot of divine power. His divine body would also suffer from the backlash. This was the best time to counterattack. Raging Dragon slashes the sky. The Emperor of Heaven Punisher roared angrily. He held his divine saber with both hands and swung it at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing did not draw his sword. He stretched out his left hand and released a dazzling golden light. It formed a dragon claw that covered the sky. Sky-capturing dragon claw. The golden dragon claw, which was hundreds of miles wide, gave off a domineering aura. It grabbed at the dazzling purple dragon shadow that was hundreds of miles long. Bam! With a muffled explosion, the ferocious and furious purple dragon shadow was captured by the golden dragon claw. No matter how powerful the purple dragon shadow was or how furious it was, it could not escape. It could only struggle with all its might under the golden dragon claw. It could not escape. As Ji Tianxing clenched his left hand, the golden dragon claw suddenly exerted force and crushed the purple dragon shadow. Crack! With a crisp crack, the purple dragon shadow shattered into thousands of pieces and scattered in the sky. Ji Tianxing had crushed the superpower of the Emperor of Heaven Punisher. He was both embarrassed and furious. He swung his divine saber again. However, before he could use his second superpower, Ji Tianxing teleported in front of him and threw a punch. Fast, like a flash of lightning, it arrived in a flash. The dazzling golden fist hit the Emperor of Heaven Punisher's body before it could even reach his eyes. Bam! A dull sound of impact burst out, and dozens of ripples spread out in the void like ripples. Great Emperor Tian Fa immediately bent over like a shrimp. He spat out a mouthful of purple blood and flew backward with a ferocious look on his face. He had just flown 100 miles away and had yet to dissipate the violent impact. Ji Tianxing followed up like a shadow, his right leg fiercely chopping down like a long knife. Pa! Emperor Tian Fa had no chance to dodge. He was hit in the shoulder by the glittering leg shadow. Crack! His broad and sturdy shoulders instantly caved in. All the bones inside were broken, and purple blood splashed out. Great Emperor Tian Fan was sent tumbling into the depths of the void like a sandbag. At the same time, Ji Tianxing teleported to catch up with him. Shadows of punches and kicks filled the sky. Pung, pung, pung. Let's go. Violent punches and kicks rained down on the great Emperor of Heaven Extermination's body. Muffled thuds rang out endlessly. Great Emperor Tian Fa was completely stunned. His body kept shaking and swaying. He flew back and forth in the void, spraying purple blood and pieces of flesh everywhere. Ji Tianxing's strength was unparalleled. He could easily destroy the defense that great Emperor Tian Fa was so proud of. Ji Tianxing's speed was unparalleled in the world. When he attacked with his fists and kicks, only shadows of golden light filled the sky. Great Emperor Tian Fa could not see where he was at all. 20 breaths later, Ji Tianxing had punched 600 times and kicked 400 times in total. Great Emperor Tian Fa, who had been burly and full of vigor, had completely changed shape. He had become a bloody ball of flesh. His torso, limbs, and head could no longer be distinguished. His facial features, head, and tail could no longer be distinguished. He had become a pile of mush. Finally, Ji Tianxing stopped attacking. His body was as straight as a sword as he stood in the void. He stared coldly at great Emperor Tian Fa and asked in a deep voice, "Do you know why I attacked you with my fists and kicks instead of using my sword to kill you?" Great Emperor Tian Fa's hoarse and weak voice came from the mush. You worm, you are humiliating me." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said indifferently, "I have humiliated you enough when I was chasing after you. Now, you don't even have the right to be humiliated by me. I punched and kicked to avenge the martial artists and people of the thousands of worlds in the major star regions. The Heaven Punishers are inhumane. They have invaded the various star regions and occupied hundreds of thousands of worlds. It is your cruel massacres that caused the deaths of trillions of living beings and thousands of worlds to flow with blood. It is your greed that caused trillions of living beings to lose their homes and become lowly slaves. They have to live in darkness and pain. Great Emperor Tian Fa fell silent for a long while after hearing Su Mo's righteous and impassioned words. After a long time, a few hoarse sneers came out from the mangled meat paste. "Ha ha, do you really think of yourself as a saint who saves the world? You are just a drop in the ocean, a grain of sand in the endless universe. Don't pretend to be so noble." Ji Tianxing's expression was still cold. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He nodded and said, "All right, then let's not talk about the 3,000 worlds and the billions of living beings. Now, I want to avenge a pure, kind, and innocent person. You once burned her to ashes with the divine flames of burning heaven right in front of my eyes. She died in endless pain. I've always kept this blood feud in my heart. I have never forgotten it. Now, please have a taste of being burned by the divine flames." As he spoke, Ji Tianxing raised his palms and made a mysterious hand seal. He released golden divine flames that covered the sky. Boom! The dazzling golden divine flames were mixed with purple, blue, and black lightning. They poured down like floodwaters and drowned the great Emperor Tian Fa. The great Emperor Tian Fa could not dodge at all. He was immediately engulfed by the divine flames of burning heaven and the lightning. Sizzle! The sound of oil splashing rang out. The great Emperor Tian Fa, who had been reduced to mush, was instantly charred black. Black smoke rose from his body. Piece after piece of flesh was burned to ashes by the divine flames of burning heaven and scattered in the sky. Unparalleled pain invaded the great Emperor Tian Fa's divine soul. He could not help but howl in pain. His consciousness blurred, and he went crazy. "Ah, Ji Tianxing, you goddamn bastard. You should be cut into pieces, skinned, and pulled out of your tendons. Ah." The great Emperor Tian Fa had completely lost his mind. He roared like a demon who had lost his mind and struggled wildly. However, the divine flames of burning heaven and the lightning locked him down. He could not escape no matter how much pain he was in. Ji Tianxing stared coldly at the great Emperor Tian Fa. He watched as the mush continued to shrink and turned into black dust that scattered in the sky. Now, do you know how much pain she must have felt? How do you feel? When you massacred the people and tortured the gods of other races, did you ever think that you would end up like this? Good and evil will be repaid. The heavenly Tao is good. If you don't believe me, look up. Who will the heavens spare? Now, even if you are tortured and killed thousands of times, you will not be able to wash away the endless sins you have committed. If I kill you with my sword, that would be the greatest mercy. Chapter 27:14. God Lord Silver Moon, you died because of me. You were reduced to ashes by the divine flames of the heaven burning. Now, I will pay back twice the pain you suffered to the heaven-punishing emperor. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as he looked at the sky with a deep gaze. The heaven-punishing emperor has fallen into my hands. He can't die even if he wants to. I will make him suffer endless torment. I won't let him off so easily. Now, your spirit in heaven can rest in peace. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing sighed in his heart. He closed his eyes. That beautiful, lively, and innocent figure appeared in his mind. She seemed to be standing in the endless darkness. She turned her head and smiled faintly. She was calm and serene. Then, she turned and left with a calm and relieved look in her eyes. She turned into a dazzling beam of starlight that pierced through the endless darkness. Finally, she became a star in the sky. The scene ended there. Ji Tianxing had repaid his debt to God Lord Silver Moon. He opened his eyes. The melancholy on his face disappeared, replaced by coldness and indifference. By now, 90% of the heaven-punishing emperor's body had been burned away. All that was left was a pile of charcoal the size of a watermelon. His physical body was almost completely destroyed, and his divine soul was severely injured. Even so, he had not died. He had only fallen into a coma. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and withdrew the divine flames of the heaven burning and the lightning. He reached out and grabbed the black, smoking pile of charcoal. He sized it up expressionlessly. "I'll seal you up for now. I'll search your divine soul and memories later." As he spoke, Ji Tianxing formed a seal with both hands and formed a mysterious golden seal. Swish, 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 swish. Thousands of golden seals merged into the charcoal, forming a heavenly god-level seal that sealed the heaven-punishing emperor. Then Ji Tianxing threw him into the sword world, turned around, and flew back. Before long, Ji Tianxing returned to the original battlefield. He saw Yun Yao, the white dragon, and the four divine beasts from afar. They were cleaning up the battlefield, picking up divine artifact fragments and interspatial rings. As for the heaven punishers, not a single one was seen. Obviously, the battle had already ended. The generals of heaven and the Vajra puppets had all been killed by them. Even the three great marshals had fallen. Chua! A white light flashed, and Ji Tianxing returned to Yun Yao's side. "Yao Yao, how's your situation? Is anyone hurt?" Ji Tianxing looked at her with concern. Seeing that she was not hurt, he was relieved. He then looked at the white dragon and the four divine beasts not far away. White dragon was slightly injured, but it was not a big deal. It was just that his robes were ragged and his hair was messy. He looked a little miserable. The strength of the four divine beasts was relatively weak, and they were all either lightly or heavily injured. There were many wounds and bloody holes on their bodies. However, this did not affect their battle prowess. They would recover after a period of recuperation. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing revealed a gratified smile and nodded slightly. After going through hundreds of battles, they have all been tempered to become extremely powerful. No matter how difficult the situation is, they will still be able to win. The ambush set by the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth was an inescapable trap. It was a sure kill trap. However, in the end, Ji Tianxing and the others were not killed, but the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth was completely annihilated. This was simply a legend. Ji Tianxing was proud of everyone. Yin Yao looked at him with concern and sized him up from head to toe. She had known and believed that Ji Tianxing was as powerful as a divine realm expert. He could easily defeat the great Emperor of Heaven and come out unscathed. However, when Ji Tianxing was chasing the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth, she was still worried that something might happen to him. Now that Ji Tianxing had returned safe and sound, she was truly at ease. "Tianxing, I'm so glad that you're not hurt. What about the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth? Did you catch up with him? You didn't let him escape again, did you?" Ji Tianxing smiled and shook his head. "Back then, I was still weak and could not do anything to him. I could only watch him escape. Now that I've reached the transcendent stage and reached the peak of the true God realm, how could I let him escape again? I've already captured him and sealed him up." Yun Yao smiled as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. She nodded and said, "Let's keep him alive for now. It won't be too late to deal with him after we find out more about the upper world's divine realm. Now that the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth has been annihilated, and even the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth has been captured by you, the great Emperor of Heaven. What right does the great Emperor of Heaven have to stop us? Soon, we will be able to destroy the great Emperor of Heaven and get rid of this threat." Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement and asked, "What about the three marshals? Did you kill them?" Yun Yao explained, "Didn't you kill the three marshals before you went after the great Emperor of Heaven and Earth? Their vitality was quite tenacious. Even after they were reduced to pieces of flesh and blood, they still wanted to gather together and restore their divine bodies. However, we quickly dealt with the great Emperor of Heaven and the Vajra puppet and killed the three marshals as well." Soon, 100 breaths had passed. White Dragon and the four divine beasts had finished cleaning up the battlefield and quickly flew back to Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's side. After chatting for a while, They all knew the result of the battle and the fate of the great Emperor of heaven and earth. White Dragon and the four divine beasts were also excited and overjoyed. Their hearts were filled with hope and anticipation. After calming down, White Dragon took out a bunch of shining rings and handed them to Ji Tianxing. Master, look, we've cleaned up the battlefield and looted more than 70 space rings. I've roughly looked through them. They're all kinds of divine weapons, gems, pills, and materials. Basically, they're all god-level cultivation resources. These are what the great generals of heaven and marshals had looted from various star areas. It's definitely a great fortune. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. All right, you'll be in charge of cleaning up these space rings. Organize the resources and give them to me. Yes, Master. White Dragon loved collecting and organizing cultivation resources. He nodded without hesitation. Qian Yu, the Black Dragon, Azure Glaze, and Lan Kuan also showed off their loot. Old Ji, when we were cleaning up the battlefield, we found many divine weapons and some strange primordial divine items. Ji Tianxing glanced at them and waved his hand. Forget it. Keep these things for yourselves. If you find anything interesting, tell me. Qian Yu smiled and nodded. He then put away the scattered divine items. Old Ji is still the best. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, You're all injured. Go back to the battleship and heal yourselves. I still need to go to Fonggang Planet. The Black Dragon asked in confusion. We've killed all the great generals of heaven and great Emperor of heaven. Old Ji, why are you still going to Fonggang Planet? Ji Tianxing led everyone onto the battleship and explained, The great generals of heaven have been killed. However, there are still many great generals of heaven on Fonggang Planet. I have to get rid of them. There's still a long way to go to get rid of all evil. Chapter 27:15. The White Dragon and the four divine beasts were recuperating in Tianxing's battleship. Ji Tianxing used a small trick to break through the divine light barrier of the Brahma Gang Star Zone. Then he brought Yun Yao into the Brahma Gang Star Zone and flew to a continent. The situation was just as he had expected. A large number of soldiers were stationed on the Brahma Gang Star Zone, and they controlled the 6 continents. The soldiers were caught off guard and didn't realize that danger was approaching. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing had led 3 marshals and 100 generals to guard the place. He had also created 81 Vajra puppets and set up a terrifying sky-destroying array. Everyone thought that the Brahma Gang Star Zone's defense was extremely strong, and it was absolutely impregnable. Even if Ji Tianxing came to invade, he would be killed. However, no one would have thought that the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing and the marshals and generals had already been killed. When Ji Tianxing entered the Brahma Gang Star Zone, no one was on guard, and all the continents were quiet. He entered a divine nation and easily killed many heaven-punishing warriors and captured a few heaven-punishing martial gods. He used the soul-searching technique and quickly got the information he wanted. He found out the location of the heaven-punishing divine palace. In the depths of one of the continents, there was a mountain range that stretched for millions of miles. That was the origin of the continent, and it was also the top land with spirit veins. The aura of divine power was extremely strong. The majestic heaven-punishing divine palace was built in that mountain range. Tianxing's battleship entered the mountain range and soon found the heaven-punishing divine palace. Then, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao personally destroyed the entire divine palace. More than 20 martial gods and thousands of heaven-punishing guards and soldiers were killed by the two of them. After that, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao took a large amount of cultivation resources. He also used the general's communication jade slip to order the captains guarding the continents to return to the heaven-punishing divine palace immediately. Ji Tianxing didn't say that the heaven-punishing divine palace had been attacked and asked the soldiers to return to fight. Instead, he used the general's tone to convey the great emperor of heaven-punishing order. He said that the great emperor had something urgent to announce. Therefore, after the captains guarding the continents received the order, they didn't hesitate to gather their soldiers and return to the heaven-punishing divine palace as quickly as possible. What happened next was self-explanatory. When the heaven-punishing soldiers rushed back to the heaven-punishing divine palace, they were met with a calamity. One after another, the heaven-punishing divine palace was the great emperor of heaven-punishing divine palace. The great emperor of heaven-punishing divine palace was great emperor of heaven-punishing divine palace had heaven-punishing the divine palace. The heaven-punishing divine heaven god emperor heaven dragon divine palaces. Only 2 million puppet powerhouses remained, and they were scattered across the continents to help the heaven-punishing race maintain their rule. Ji Tianxing continued to travel around the continents to purify the puppets controlled by the heaven punishers. It heaven of heaven god of heaven divine heaven. 90 days later, all 2 million puppets were purified. The Fan Gang star was truly saved, and Ji Tianxing also reaped a huge harvest. The heaven-mending orb absorbed a huge amount of life-saving divine light, and its power increased by 2 times. Naturally, Ji Tianxing's power also doubled, reaching 81 times that of a peak real god. After the matter was over, he and Yun Yao left the Fan Gang planet. After returning to the 5 Elements world, everyone entered the divine pagoda to cultivate in seclusion. Ji Tianxing did not enter the divine pagoda. He still had a very important matter that needed to be resolved as soon as possible. The great emperor of heaven Punisher, who had been burnt to a crisp, was still asleep in the sword world. Ji Tianxing took him out of the sword world and prepared to interrogate him about the secrets of the heaven Punisher star and the upper realm deities. However, the heaven-slaying emperor was still unconscious due to his severe injuries. Ji Tianxing was too lazy to waste time, so he directly used the soul-searching technique to plunder his memories. This method was simple and crude, but very efficient. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing released a few rays of mysterious black light from his palm and enveloped the great emperor of heaven Punisher. In the blink of an eye, the mysterious black light entered the charred flesh and started to erode the great emperor of heaven Punisher's divine soul. The heaven Punisher was not good at cultivating the divine soul. However, the great emperor of heaven Punisher's divine soul was different from ordinary people's. It had obviously been baptized by the deities of the upper realm, and its defensive power was very strong. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had released the sky-burning divine flame, which had severely injured the great emperor of heaven Punisher and almost killed him. His divine soul had been severely damaged, and cracks had already appeared on it. Its defensive power had also been greatly reduced. As a result, Ji Tianxing had to use some tricks to successfully invade the great emperor of heaven Punisher's divine soul and plunder a large amount of memories. Hundreds of millions of images and scenes surged into Ji Tianxing's mind like tidewater, forming a continuous river of memories that flowed rapidly. Time passed quietly. The great emperor of heaven Punisher's divine soul and memories flooded into Ji Tianxing's mind like a raging tide. This lasted for 15 minutes before it ended. In fact, the great emperor of heaven Punisher had lived for thousands of years. His complete memories were at least 10 times more than this. However, Ji Tianxing had done a rough selection when he was retrieving the memories. He had removed all the memories from thousands of years ago. He had also omitted the less important things and memories. Even so, the great emperor of heaven Punisher's memories contained too much information. It was complicated and vast. Ji Tianxing had ended the soul search not because he had obtained the information he wanted. Instead, the great emperor of heaven Punisher's divine soul and memories had gone blank. It was as if someone had erased them. This is strange. A part of the great emperor of heaven Punisher's divine soul and memories have been erased. Did he do this to protect himself after he was severely injured and unconscious, or did someone erase his memories? Ji Tianxing was deeply confused. He ended the soul search and focused on reading the great emperor of heaven Punisher's memories. Therefore, all kinds of images and information flashed through his mind like lightning. After an hour, Ji Tianxing finally sorted out the images and memories. He had an answer. I see. He had obtained a lot of information that he wanted. Many of the questions in his mind were answered. He could not help but nod. Through the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's memories, he knew what had happened in the past 1,000 years. This included the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's initial appearance, when they had been protected by the gods, and when they had developed rapidly. The great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's 5 continents, tens of billions of people, 3 seas, and dozens of ancient ruins and secret realms appeared in Ji Tianxing's mind. Even though he had never been to the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher, now that he had merged the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's memories, he knew the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher like the back of his hand. It was as if he had been there in person. Other than the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher, Ji Tianxing also learned many useful secrets. For example, Crown Prince Tian Shu's cultivation and talents, Queen Yin Shuyan's appearance, strength, and ambition. All kinds of information and secrets gave Ji Tianxing a deeper understanding of the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher. He gradually understood the whole story and was confident that he could destroy the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher. Chapter 27:16. The great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's 1,000 years of memories were like a treasure to Ji Tianxing. However, after he sorted through the memories, his expression turned grave and his expression turned sour. This was because the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's memories contained everything about the Heaven Punisher tribe and the Heaven Punisher planet. The only thing missing was the secrets of the upper realm's deities. Ji Tianxing searched through the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's memories, but all he could find were scenes of divine grace, divine light descending, and billions of people worshipping him. Other than that, there was no information about the deity's true appearance, identity, strength, or other means. Even the orders that the deities had given to the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher were nowhere to be found. This result made Ji Tianxing frown deeply. His eyes flashed coldly. No wonder the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's memories are incomplete. It seems that the blank parts are related to the deities of the upper realm. With the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's abilities, he could not have erased his own memories. So, the deities of the upper realm must have erased part of his memories. With the abilities of a Lord God and a King God, they could have used such divine powers. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and guessed the result. He was filled with hatred. Damn it! Who is the deity of the upper realm that ordered the Heaven Punisher tribe? They already have such a powerful force. Why are they still so cautious? The more Ji Tianxing thought about it, the more confused he became. He became even more anxious. However, he could only get these clues from the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's memories. He could not dig further. The deity behind the Heaven Punisher tribe was too powerful and very cautious. He was at his wit's end and could not continue his investigation. After a long time, Ji Tianxing could only sigh helplessly and put this matter aside for now. Wait until I conquer the Heaven Punisher planet, capture Tian Shu and Empress Yin Shuiyin, and search their souls and memories. Hopefully, I can find something. There is no hope for the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher. Ji Tianxing could only place his hopes on Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu. He opened his eyes and looked expressionlessly at the charred great Emperor of Heaven Punisher. Great Emperor Tian Fa was still unconscious. No one knew when he would wake up. His divine soul's memory was already blank, and now that Ji Tianxing had plundered 1,000 years' worth of memories, his divine soul's injury was even more severe, and his consciousness was in a mess. This great Emperor Tian Fa was no longer the real him. Even if Ji Tianxing tortured him with the soul-burning divine flame, it wouldn't be enough to vent his anger. After all, great Emperor Heaven Punisher had lost his mind. There was no way he would repent. To Ji Tianxing, Heaven Punisher was no longer useful. He waved his hand and unleashed a few wisps of pitch-black godly flames of annihilation, which engulfed great Emperor Tian Fa. Chua, the annihilation divine flame, burned fiercely and quickly burned the charred meat into ashes. In less than 100 breaths' time, great Emperor Tian Fa had turned into dust. Both his physical body and divine soul had vanished. This was true death and death. A peerless expert, the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher, had been reduced to ashes just like that. Not long after, Ji Tianxing calmed himself down and buried this matter in the bottom of his heart. He controlled the five elements world and continued to roam the Brahma Gangstar zone. He saved the various worlds he encountered along the way. However, most of the worlds have been abandoned by the Heaven Punisher. The Heaven Punisher soldiers guarding the worlds had already retreated with large amounts of resources. Only a large number of puppets were left in the various worlds. They were still helping the Heaven Punisher to guard their bases. It seems that Great Emperor Tian Fa has already prepared for both sides. If he can kill me on the Brahma Gangstar, everything will be as normal. No one will be able to stop the Heaven Punisher from dominating the universe. If he fails, the Heaven Punisher soldiers guarding the various worlds will also retreat with resources and treasures. They will escape back to the Heaven Punisher Star Zone. Ji Tianxing calculated silently. He had a plan in mind. He could guess that most of the Heaven Punisher soldiers had already retreated to the Heaven Punisher Star Zone. The Heaven Punisher's elites had withered. They would definitely tighten their defenses and concentrate all their forces on the Heaven Punisher Star Zone, waiting to fight him to the death. This was the result he had expected. At the same time, it was the Heaven Punisher's only choice. Although the Heaven Punisher soldiers in the various worlds had retreated, they still left behind a large number of puppets. Ji Tianxing could only work hard to purify the puppets. Day after day, year after year. When he had saved more than 30 worlds and left the Brahma Gangstar Zone, 12 years had already passed. In the past 12 years, he had gained a lot. The power of the Heaven Patching Pearl had increased by 40 times. The life-saving Holy Light had also increased by 100 times. Taking a martial god as an example, the life-saving light contained in the Heaven-Mending Orb could resurrect 500,000 of them. If it was a martial sage, the Heaven Patching Pearl could revive 10 million martial sages. Furthermore, Ji Tianxing's strength had also increased greatly. He was now 99 times stronger than a peak true god. Under the restrictions of the rules of heaven, this was already the limit. Even if he saved more worlds and purified more puppets, it would be useless. Even if he consumed a large amount of resources and cultivated in seclusion in the Holy Tower for 100 or even 1,000 years, his strength would not increase at all. He estimated that his current strength was comparable to a 5th-level Heavenly God Realm powerhouse. However, he had not broken through to the Heavenly God Realm and could not form a godhead. Ji Tianxing had gained a lot, and his strength had increased to the limit. Yin Yao and Ji Ku had also reached the half-step Heavenly God Realm after many years of hard work, although their strength was not as abnormal as Ji Tianxing's. However, in the 3,000 worlds, he was still a peerless expert who could be ranked in the top 5. Bai Long had reached level 9 True God Realm and was still working hard to reach the peak of level 9. The 4 spiritual beasts had reached level 8 True God Realm and were working hard to reach level 9 True God Realm. Even the weakest Chen Shun and Iya had reached level 7 True God Realm. Other than the increase in strength, there was another matter that had to be done. Bai Long and the Golden Mountain King had researched for a long time and finally came up with a plan to increase the warship's power. They had spent a large amount of Dawn Stones and Divine-grade resources to strengthen the main cannon and other Divine cannons on the Tianxing warship. There were now 2 main cannons and 400 Divine cannons. Moreover, the power of the Divine cannons had increased by 2 times. However, there was a drawback. The resources consumed when firing the Divine cannons had increased by 2 times. Fortunately, they had collected a large amount of resources during their journey across the 3-star regions. About 90% of the ordinary resources and treasures had been integrated into the 5 elements world to modify the world and increase its power. The remaining Divine-grade resources were stored in the Sword World, 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower, and everyone's spatial rings. These Divine-grade resources were enough for everyone to cultivate in seclusion for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, they did not lack Divine-grade resources at all. Moreover, there were so many Dawn Stone mines hidden in the 5 elements world. The main resource that everyone used for cultivation was still those mysterious Dawn Stones. After leaving the Fan Gang star region, the Five Elements world flew into the celestial plasma star region, which was now the Heaven Punisher star region. They were already very close to the Heaven Punisher star region. Chapter 27:17. 800 years ago, the Heaven Punisher star zone had already become the Heaven Punisher's main camp. The Heaven Punisher had taken over the 300 worlds and turned them into an impregnable fortress. The cultivators and commoners living in the various worlds had long gotten used to the Heaven Punisher's rule. Even if they were enslaved by the Heaven Punisher and were ordered around and oppressed by the Heaven Punisher, they were still at ease. They had no thoughts of resisting. In the White Dragon's words, the cultivators and commoners of these worlds had long since learned to resign themselves to adversity. Their servility had been deeply rooted in their hearts. After all, most of the cultivators and commoners had less than 800 years of life. They had not experienced the great war and tragic scenes of the Heaven Punisher's invasion. They had lived under the Heaven Punisher's rule since birth. Most of the cultivators and experts who had lived for more than 800 years had died in the Great War back then. A portion of the survivors had been turned into puppets by the Heaven Punisher. They were loyal and devoted to the Heaven Punisher. How could they have any thoughts of resisting? When Ji Tianxing and the others killed their way into the various worlds and killed the Heaven Punisher, they became the public enemy of the entire world. Not only did they have to deal with the Heaven Punisher, but they also had to deal with the encirclement of the various races' experts. Even if they explained that they had come to save the commoners, the cultivators and commoners of the various worlds were not moved. They even righteously stated that they lived very peacefully and did not need anyone to save them. The White Dragon and the four divine beasts were very angry when faced with such a situation. Even Yin Yao and Ji Ku were so angry that they were depressed. Ji Tianxing was not surprised at all. He calmly persuaded everyone, no matter what race, all living beings like to be content with the status quo. Even if they lose their freedom and are enslaved and oppressed, their lives are miserable. As long as they are still alive, they can endure anything. Over time, their servility is deeply ingrained in them. Thus, we cannot blame the commoners for being too stupid. Let's not think of ourselves as noble saviors. We're just avengers. We only want to destroy the Heaven Punisher. We just need to do what we think is right. Everyone felt much better after listening to his advice. Later on, when they killed their way into the various worlds and were surrounded by the Heaven Punisher and indigenous cultivators, they no longer had any psychological burden. No matter who it was, as long as they besieged or tried to assassinate them, only death awaited them. On average, they had to save a world every 2 months and kill thousands of heaven-punishing generals and soldiers. The heaven-punishing star area, which had been peaceful for 800 years, was now in a bloody storm. In the first few years, every world that they went to was guarded by a large number of heaven-punishing generals. 5 years later, they had saved 30 worlds. From then on, when they arrived at the various worlds, they found that the soldiers guarding the worlds had all left. Without a doubt, the news of Ji Tianxing's invasion of the Heaven-Punishing Star Zone had already spread to every world. The Heaven Punishers guarding the various worlds received orders from Planet Heaven Punisher and retreated to Planet Heaven Punisher. They wouldn't make unnecessary sacrifices. They would stay in various worlds and wait for Ji Tianxing to slaughter them. When Ji Tianxing and the others realized this, they decisively changed their plans. He no longer headed to the various worlds to kill the Heaven Punishers. Instead, he headed straight for Planet Heaven Punisher. After all, the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor, the Imperial Tutor, the Left and Right Protectors, and the 5 Marshals were all dead. In the current Heaven Punisher clan, only Empress Yuan Shuiyin and Crown Prince Tian Shu were left. No matter how many Heaven Punishers the mother and son gathered, their power was limited. Ji Tianxing and the others weren't worried at all. They would have no problem killing their way in a Planet Heaven Punisher. In the depths of the Heaven-Punishing Star area, the famous Planet Heaven Punisher floated silently in the void. The entire planet was protected by a dazzling purple divine light. There was also a huge 5-colored band of light in the void around it. The five-colored band of light, with a diameter of 1 billion miles, was formed by a vast amount of divine power. It was like a protective ring around planet Heaven Punisher. It could also send endless divine power to planet Heaven Punisher. It was very mysterious. In all the 3,000 worlds, only planet Heaven Punisher had this item. After all, only planet Heaven Punisher was protected and supported by the upper realm's godly spirits. This planet, with a diameter of 200 million miles, could only be ranked second among the 300 worlds in the Heaven Punishing Star area. The largest planet was planet Celestial Globe. 900 years ago, planet Celestial Globe had been the main planet of the entire star area. However, after the Heaven Punishers had taken over the entire star area, they had become the overlords of this star area. Even the name of planet Celestial Globe had been changed to Heaven Punisher Star Area. Currently, planet Heaven Punisher was home to almost 30 billion Heaven Punishers. The population had long swelled to the point of exploding. Not only were there kingdoms and cities built on the land, but there were also countless kingdoms and cities built under the ground, in the mountains and forests, and on the islands of the endless sky ocean. The problem of housing for the Heaven Punishers had been solved. At least everyone had a place to settle down. However, the Heaven Punishers had an extremely strong reproductive ability. After receiving the protection and baptism of God's grace, their strength had increased rapidly. Planet Heaven Punisher's cultivation resources had long been overexploited and collected. It had become barren and barren. If not for the nourishment of endless divine power, planet Heaven Punisher would have become a barren and abandoned planet. Fortunately, the Heaven Punishers had sent billions of elite soldiers to invade various star areas and occupy more than 1,000 worlds. Every day, countless Heaven Punishing battleships would return from various star areas and send a vast amount of resources they had plundered back to planet Heaven Punisher. When the battleships left planet Heaven Punisher, they would bring along a large number of elite soldiers and experts to replenish the forces of various star areas. This was the only way to maintain the balance and stability of planet Heaven Punisher. More and more people were sent to various star areas. The Heaven Punishers had plundered the cultivation resources of various worlds and sent them back to planet Heaven Punisher. On the surface, it seemed that the Heaven Punishers were rapidly expanding and strengthening. At most, they would be able to conquer all 3,000 worlds in 1,000 years. However, Great Emperor Heaven Punisher, the Thearch's son, and the many marshals had already expected this result. In less than 200 or 300 years, the balance of planet Heaven Punisher would be broken. At that time, the entire star would be abandoned. The 30 billion Heaven Punishers would have to split into two groups and move to planet Celestial Globe and another star. Therefore, Great Emperor Heaven Punisher had been preparing for this since 100 years ago. 2 billion Heaven Punishing craftsmen were building cities and kingdoms on Celestial Globe and the other star day and night. 100 years later, when planet Heaven Punisher was on the verge of being abandoned, the Heaven Punishers would cross the void and move to those two stars. However, no one had expected that the Heaven Punishers would suffer an unprecedented blow while this plan was in progress. Great Emperor Heaven Punisher and many experts had died. The only experts left in the Heaven Punishers were the Thearch's son and the Thearch's empress. When the news reached planet Heaven Punisher, the Thearch's empress and Tianshu were extremely shocked and grief-stricken. At the same time, Tianshu decisively issued a ban to block the news and forbade anyone from leaking the secret. Chapter 27:18. At that moment, it was evening and the sun was setting. Planet Heaven Trader was as peaceful as ever. The people of the Heaven Trader in the 5 continents and 3 seas were cultivating and living as usual. Everyone was kept in the dark and did not know that the great emperor of the Heaven Trader and a few marshals had died. More than 30 billion people were still immersed in their pride and longing, waiting for the Heaven Trader to unify the 3,000 worlds. Ordinary martial artists worked hard to cultivate. The experts who had just reached the cross-calamity realm were gathering in the imperial cities of the various countries, waiting for the annual divine light baptism. After the divine light baptism, they would directly reach the martial sage realm. After cultivating in seclusion for another 10 years and stabilizing their strength, they would be able to join the Heaven Trader fleet. By then, they would leave the crowded and resource-poor planet Heaven Trader and follow the fleet to conquer the universe. By then, everyone would be able to slaughter the foreign races and plunder a large amount of resources. If they performed well and were able to make contributions, they would be able to obtain vast lands and rewards. The huge temptation was constantly tempting and encouraging the hundreds of millions of martial artists. Of course, many martial artists also realized that many fleets had returned to planet Heaven Trader recently. The mighty battleships and the majestic teams gathered high in the sky, forming a sea of battleships. However, no one thought too much about it. They only thought that the great emperor had a new goal and mission. No one knew what kind of mission the hundreds of thousands of battleships were carrying. Return to the mother planet quickly. After handing in the cultivation resources, the fleets will gather as soon as possible and guard the mother planet in outer space. This was an order from Emperor God Palace, and it had already been passed down to the fleets. Therefore, more than 200,000 battleships carrying 30 million heaven-punishing warriors returned to planet Heaven Punishing and guarded the sky. Large batches of battleships flew back to planet Heaven Trader every day. After handing in the resources to the Emperor God Palace, they returned to the fleets to guard planet Heaven Trader. There was a battleship every few thousand miles in the sky above the 5 continents and 3 seas. Furthermore, outside the divine light barrier of planet Heaven Trader, the dark and cold void was filled with battleships. The entire planet Heaven Trader was surrounded by battleships. All the soldiers of the Heaven Trader fleet were on high alert and did not dare to slack off. However, the 30 million soldiers of the heaven-conquering army began to mutter in their hearts. They were full of doubts. What exactly had happened? Why did the Emperor God Palace send out an order to recall all the fleets to defend planet Heaven? Were they going to start a war with some power? Or was it that the heaven-punishing planet was about to face a major crisis and needed protection? Or perhaps Great Emperor Heaven Punisher had a new target or plan. No one knew the exact reason. No one knew that the heaven-defying martial monarch whom they treated like a deity had already turned into ashes. High above the origin continent, at the peak of the vast sea of clouds, stood a magnificent ancient temple. This palace was the highest ruling center of the Heaven Punisher race, the sacred and majestic Divine Emperor Palace. The Divine Emperor Palace was built 20,000 years ago. It was the masterpiece of the previous Great Emperor Tian Fa. It was only after the previous Great Emperor Tian Fa ascended to the divine realm 6,000 years ago that the current Great Emperor Tian Fa succeeded him. The temple, which was thousands of feet tall, exuded an ancient aura. Under the reflection of the setting sun, the temple shone with golden light, still glorious and solemn. Tens of thousands of elite guards in silver armor guarded every corner of the Emperor God Palace. Hundreds of elite martial gods in dark golden armor were on standby in the Emperor God Palace. The entire Emperor God Palace was under martial law. The atmosphere was heavy and depressing. At this moment, in the depths of the Emperor God Palace, in a magnificent and spacious secret room that was shrouded in purple light, 8 true God Realm generals in golden armor were guarding the door of the secret room. The divine power in the secret room was extremely dense. It formed a 5-colored mist that surged in 100 feet wide space. The floor and walls were paved with star divine stones and decorated with thousands of rare divine stones. No spirit vein or treasure ground in the world could compare to this secret room. Cultivating in this secret room would increase one's strength 20 times faster than cultivating in the outside world. In the north of the secret room, countless divine stones were inlaid on the wide wall, forming a huge painting of 100 birds looking up to a phoenix. The 100 birds and the phoenix that was about to fly were shining with divine light. They were lifelike. Under the exquisite stone carvings, there was a 3-foot-long purple jade bed. The bed was not made of ordinary purple jade, but a divine stone that was similar to jade. It contained a special divine power that could strengthen one's divine soul and divine power. It was of high quality. This was a divine item that Great Emperor Tian Fun had found in a galaxy. It was rare, and there was only one of it in the entire Tian Fun tribe. Great Emperor Tian Fun had spent more than 20 years to make this stone bed. He placed it in this secret room for Empress Yun Shuiyin to sleep and cultivate. A graceful and hazy figure sat cross-legged on the wide bed, made of purple jade, and it was indistinct under the cover of the five-colored divine mist. A gauze curtain made of supreme-grade star golden sand covered the entire stone bed. No one could see what was going on inside. The slim and graceful figure was like a goddess that had walked out of legends. She was tall and had long, icy blue hair that reached her waist. Her hair was tied up in a noble bun. She wore an icy blue dress inlaid with divine stones. There were tassels on her collar and sleeves that shone with icy blue light. She was beautiful like an 18-year-old girl. Her features were picturesque, and she had a pure and elegant temperament. Her appearance and temperament were filled with the gentleness of the Water Spirit clan. However, she had a pair of long and narrow phoenix eyes. The corners of her eyes extended to her temples, giving her a dignified and murderous aura. When she opened her eyes, her large and bright golden pupils were filled with the domineering aura of a god. She was the most mysterious expert of the Tian Fun tribe. She was also the empress that Great Emperor Tian Fun doted on and trusted the most. Yin Shuiyin. Not only was she the saintess of the Water Spirit clan, but she was also the reincarnation of a divine lord from the upper world. In the Tian Fun tribe, her status and position were second only to Great Emperor Tian Fun. At this moment, the voice of the guard captain came from outside the secret room. "Empress, His Highness has arrived." Yin Shuiyin looked up slightly. She flicked a ray of icy light from her right hand and hit the door of the secret room. Instantly, the door of the secret room creaked open. A huge figure that was 100 feet tall walked through the five-colored mist and stepped into the secret room. Although the secret room was very spacious, the 100 feet tall giant still seemed to feel oppressed and cramped when he arrived. His body was as black as ink, but there were 99 icy blue lines crisscrossing the surface of his body. There were a few hideous scars on his huge head. The top of his head was bald and shiny. He exuded a ferocious and domineering aura, and his face was very gloomy. However, when he stood in the middle of the secret room and faced the misty purple jade bed, his expression was very respectful and submissive. "Mother, you've finally come out of seclusion?" Chapter 27:19. There was no doubt about it. The 30-foot-tall bald giant was the son of the Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher and Yin Shuiyin, Imperial Prince Tianshu. After being beaten half to death by Ji Tianxing, he had escaped back to the Heaven Punisher planet under the protection of the Neptune Halberd. He had been in seclusion for decades, and his injuries had finally healed. Not only that, he had also benefited greatly from his seclusion in the hourglass of time deep within the Emperor God Palace. The flow of time in the hourglass of time was 10 times faster than in the outside world. Only 30 years had passed in the outside world, but he had been in seclusion for 300 years. Not only had he healed, but he had also mastered a divine art, greatly increasing his strength. Yin Shuiyin nodded slightly and sighed in a low voice. "Your father has fallen, and the marshals have been killed one after another. We are the only ones left in the Heaven Punisher clan. How can I not come out of seclusion?" Tianshu's face was filled with hatred. He gritted his teeth and said firmly, "Mother, don't worry. Not only have I recovered from my injuries, but I have also mastered the coiling dragon 4C's divine art you taught me. Now, your child's strength has increased tenfold. When Ji Tianxing invades, I'll definitely be able to avenge my humiliation and kill him." Yin Shuiyin was slightly relieved, but she still shook her head and said calmly, "Tianshu, it's not that I don't believe you. You are indeed the #1 genius in the universe, and I am proud of you. Nevertheless, judging from Ji Tianxing's various performances, his strength had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Even if your strength increases by 4 times, you are still no match for him. Otherwise, your father and the marshals wouldn't have failed and been wiped out when they set up an ambush on the Fongang planet. Tianshu also understood that the difference between him and Ji Tianxing wasn't something that could be made up for by a fourfold increase in strength. Yin Shuiyan's judgment rendered him speechless, and he couldn't refute it. However, he was filled with unwillingness, and endless jealousy and hatred grew in his heart. Mother, where did Ji Tianxing come from? I am already the #1 genius in the universe. How can he be stronger than me? A freak like him shouldn't exist in the mortal world. If it wasn't for him, I would still be the #1 genius, and our clan's plan to dominate the world wouldn't be hindered. Yin Shuiyan could obviously tell that Tianshu was crazily jealous of Ji Tianxing. She said calmly, Tianshu, you might be right. Mother, what do you mean? Tianshu was stunned for a moment and showed a puzzled expression. Yin Shuiyan explained, Mother looked up all the information regarding Ji Tianxing and combined it with his performance over the past 100 years. She finally came to a conclusion. A monstrous figure like him should not appear in the mortal world. He might not be from the mortal world. Maybe he's like Mother, a reincarnated powerhouse from the upper realm. Tianshu's expression changed as he frowned. A moment later, he came back to his senses and hurriedly asked, Imperial Mother, didn't you say that the cycle of reincarnation is the most heartless? Could it be that only 1 in a million experts could reincarnate with the memories of their past lives? Looking at the past 30,000 years, you're the only one in the Heaven Punishing, Brahma Gang, and Black Dragon star zones. Yin Shuiyan said calmly, Ji Tianxing comes from the Purple Heaven Star Zone, which is the 4th star zone. All this time, the Purple Heaven Star Zone has been remote, and our clan doesn't know much about it. Moreover, Ji Tianxing's performance and his shocking growth rate are all miraculous and heaven-defying. There's no other explanation other than that he's the reincarnation of a god from the upper realm. Tianshu took a deep breath and was silent for a long time. His eyes flickered with a bright light, and it took him a while to accept this result. I see. He's the reincarnation of a god from the upper realm, which is why he has such heaven-defying talent and skills. In that case, I'm not weaker than him. I'm still the #1 genius in the universe. Tianshu felt much better and regained his confidence as the #1 genius. Yin Shuiyan said calmly, It doesn't matter if you're the #1 genius or not. Not long ago, Mother received news that Ji Tianxing has already killed his way into the Heaven Punishing Star Zone. Soon, he'll come to the Heaven Punishing Star and fight with us. Tianshu clenched his fists and said solemnly, Mother, don't worry. I've been keeping an eye on Ji Tianxing's movements. I've long been on guard. Since Father's death, I've taken over everything in the Emperor God Palace. I've already made preparations. I've called back the fleets of the major star zones to guard the Heaven Punishing Star. Moreover, I've sent many generals to add formations to the Divine Light Barrier to increase its power. Now, not only are there more than 200,000 battleships and 30 million soldiers guarding the Heaven Punishing Star, there are also tens of thousands of divine formations waiting for Ji Tianxing to die. Hearing Tianshu's words, Yin Shuiyan smiled with relief and nodded slightly. Tianshu, you've finally grown up. You can take charge of the situation on your own. However, those weak fleets and soldiers can't stop Ji Tianxing's attack at all. Only a force as powerful as a god can kill him and guard the Heaven Punishing Star. Sky Pivot frowned, and the hope and confidence in his heart dissipated. He looked at Yin Shuiyan with a worried expression and asked, Mother, you've been in seclusion for more than 200 years. Have you mastered a peerless divine technique? Yin Shuiyan nodded and said unhurriedly, 200 years ago, Mother reached the peak of the true God realm. However, I have to help your father complete his great cause. I have to protect you as you grow. I also have to prepare for the God King realm in the future. Therefore, I haven't ascended yet. I've stayed on the Heaven Punishing Star to cultivate the Coiling Dragon 4 Seas divine technique. This divine technique originated from the ancient times. It was created by a certain god king in the dragon realm. Cultivating this divine technique can continuously increase one's talent and comprehension, allowing one's strength to increase rapidly. Tianshu also knew that a cultivator's talent and comprehension were innately determined. It was easy to predict how great a cultivator's future achievements would be. If one's talent and aptitude weren't abnormal enough, they were destined to never become a god king. No matter how hard they cultivated, it was impossible for them to become a god king. There were only a few methods that could increase a cultivator's aptitude and comprehension. However, even if it was forcefully increased, the effects were limited. However, the coiling dragon 4C's divine technique was different. It could simulate the 4C's of consciousness and increase one's cultivation by 4 times. At most, it could increase a god's aptitude and comprehension by 4 times and increase one's strength by 36 times. Therefore, Yun Shuiyan's true strength was far greater than that of her father, the heaven-punishing emperor. Yun Shuiyan continued, "After cultivating for more than 200 years, I've finally gained something. My strength is now 30 times that of a peak true god. Unfortunately, that bastard Ji Tianqing came. Otherwise, I'd have to cultivate for another 200 years to increase my strength by 36 times and reach my limit. When that happens, I'll be able to change my fate and increase my talent and comprehension to the God King realm. When I ascend to the higher realms, I'll have full confidence in breaking through to the God King realm." Heavens! Mother's strength is increased by 30 times, and she's close to her limit? Tianshu was shocked. He was pleasantly surprised. Chapter 2720. Tianshu had also cultivated the 4C's coiling dragon divine technique, so he knew how powerful it was. However, he did not expect this technique to be so powerful. It allowed his mother's strength to reach 30 times that of a peak true god. Tianshu had always thought that after becoming a peak true god, one's strength would increase by 5 times at most. That was the limit, just like his father, the great emperor of heaven Punisher. However, he did not expect the 4C's coiling dragon divine technique to increase one's strength to 36 times. This was simply an unparalleled and unheard of martial art that shook the ancients and dazzled the contemporaries. As expected of the peerless technique created by the Dragon Realm's King of Gods. It's really powerful. Tianshu praised sincerely. He could not help but ask, "Mother, since you've reached 30 times the strength of a peak true god, killing Ji Tianqing should be a piece of cake, right?" Yun Shuiyan's clear and calm gaze pierced through the 5-colored mist and saw the hope and anticipation in Tianshu's eyes. She wanted to give a straightforward answer, but she could not bear to extinguish Tianshu's hope. After a moment of silence, she answered, "Mother, I'm confident that I can fight him, but he has many followers who are also powerful. We can't rely on luck. We have to give our all and use our last trump card. We can't afford to lose." Tianshu understood that the planet of Heaven Punisher was their last fortress. If they lost, they would not be able to protect the planet of Heaven Punisher, and they would be homeless. "Mother Empress, your so-called final trump card. What do you mean?" Yun Shuiyan pointed at the sky and said playfully, "The backer of the clan of Heaven Punisher. They spent thousands of years and effort to nurture the clan of Heaven Punisher to this level. They were halfway to dominating the 3,000 worlds, but someone jumped out to destroy them and destroy the entire clan of Heaven Punisher. No matter what, they won't sit back and do nothing, right?" Tianshu thought to himself. He asked doubtfully, "But mother, the heavenly axioms rules restrict them. They can't interfere with the matters of the mortal world. Apart from spreading divine light and baptizing, they can't do anything else." Yun Shuiyan shook her head gently. "The methods of the upper realms deities are not something you and I can imagine. Whether they can help or not, we must try our best. Don't waste any more time. Quickly send an order to the head ritual master. Tell him to immediately prepare for the sacrificial ceremony. Prepare 300,000 people as sacrifices." 300,000 people? Tian Shu was shocked and asked in disbelief, "Mother, this is 10 times the number of supreme grade treasures. It's enough to hold 10 heavenly worship ceremonies. If this order is passed down, it will cause criticism from the people and affect the morale of the army." Yin Shuiyin said expressionlessly, "There are already enough heaven punishers. Most of our people are living like pigs. Apart from contributing to the great cause of our race, what else can they do? Moreover, this battle concerned the survival of the heaven-punishing race. They cannot rely on luck. As long as I can save the heaven-punisher race, I won't hesitate even if I have to sacrifice 3 million or 30 million people, let alone 300,000. Tian Shu was silent for a moment before he gritted his teeth and said, "I understand. I will follow Mother's orders." With that said, Dubby bowed to Yin Shuiyin and left the chamber. Yin Shuiyin was the only one left in the chamber, and it immediately quieted down. She looked at the door with a deep gaze. Her gaze seemed to be able to penetrate thousands of barriers and see the depths of the void. Ji Tianxing, oh Ji Tianxing, if you're really the reincarnation of a god from the upper realm, then this is the battle of destiny between you and me. I'd like to see who will be reborn and who will be the chosen one. Yin Shuiyin muttered to herself. Her eyes were filled with confidence and murderous intent. 4 months passed in the blink of an eye. The vast and boundless starry sky was as cold and silent as ever. Planet Heaven Punisher was still surrounded by the 5-colored divine light. Outside the purple light barrier on the surface of the planet, there were densely packed battleships in the void. There were at least 100,000 battleships and tens of millions of Heaven Punishers guarding the southern hemisphere. After all, Ji Tianxing was rushing over from the Brahma astral star zone and was heading in this direction. All the battleships were on high alert and were on high alert. The main cannons at the front of the battleships were opened, revealing their black muzzles. They could shoot out destructive light beams at any time. As a precaution, the northern hemisphere of Planet Heaven Punisher was guarded by 50,000 battleships. In addition, there were 100,000 battleships on standby in the inner part of the Divine Light Barrier and high in the sky above Planet Heaven Punisher. This was all the battleships that the Heaven Punishers could gather in the past 2 years. There were also hundreds of thousands of battleships and hundreds of millions of Heaven Punishers scattered in the distant star zones. They would not be able to return for 3 to 5 years. However, all the soldiers believed in them. They had the advantage in numbers and were so powerful. Even if a few star zones joined forces and sent tens of millions of troops to attack Planet Heaven Punisher, they would still be defeated on the spot. Right at this moment, a star shining with golden light was flying over from the depths of the void. Swoosh! The star that was wrapped in golden light dragged a long golden flame behind it as it headed straight for Planet Heaven Punisher. The two sides were still a few 100 million miles apart, but the tens of millions of soldiers guarding Planet Heaven Punisher realized that the situation was not good. Although the shining golden star was not big, it was about 100 million miles in diameter. It had a diameter of about 100 million miles, which was only 1/7 of the heaven-destroying star. However, it was a real star after all. It tore through the void like a shooting star and flew toward Planet Heaven Punisher without slowing down. In another day at most, the golden meteor would collide head-on with the Heaven Punisher star. How could the tens of millions of soldiers not be frightened and worried? The captains quickly reported the situation to the generals, and the generals also reported the situation to the temporary commanders of the battleships. The temporary commanders of the 5 battleships immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They quickly sent the news back to Planet Heaven Punisher and reported it to the Darch God Palace. The 5 commanders were all members of the royal family of the Heaven Punisher. They were the brothers of the Heaven Punisher Emperor and the cousins of Tian Shu. They all had the titles of Prince and Lord. Of course, their strength was only average. They were between the 3rd and 5th level of the true immortal realm. If the Heaven Punisher had not been in danger and had no one to use, Tian Shu would not have let them be commanders. Soon, the order from the Darch God Palace was delivered to the 5 commanders. Calm down. Be careful that this is a trick of the enemy. Order all the soldiers to prepare for battle. The arch-god and I will arrive soon. Be on standby. This order was given by Tian Shu. It was obvious that he had discussed countermeasures with Yun Shuiyin after receiving the news from the 5 commanders. However, the mother and son were in the arch-god palace and did not see the golden shooting star. They did not know what was going on, so they could only go to the void to check it out. The 5 commanders held Tian Shu's order and quickly calmed down. They quickly passed down the order to the generals. Soon, the 100,000 battleships and tens of millions of soldiers received the news. After knowing that the arch-god and the arch-god were about to arrive, the morale of the soldiers quickly stabilized. Chapter 27-21. Although the tens of millions of soldiers were calm and on standby, they were still waiting for orders. Everyone stared at the dazzling golden meteor in the sky, their hearts filled with worry and anxiety. Seeing the meteor approaching with no sign of slowing down, the tens of millions of soldiers were on tenterhooks. The atmosphere in the 100,000 warships was heavy and oppressive. Everyone was filled with doubts and guesses. Why would a meteor appear at such a critical moment? Why was that meteor so big? Why was it thousands of times bigger than a common meteor? Why was that meteor heading straight for Planet Heaven Punisher? Could it be an enemy of the Heaven Punishing race that had used a divine power? Or was it just an accident? Was the heavens playing a joke on the Heaven Punisher? No one knew the answer. Everyone's hearts were in a state of turmoil and unease. Everyone was waiting for the Crown Prince and Empress to arrive as soon as possible so that they could make a decision. For hours passed in this torturous wait. A black dragon battleship, which was 3,000 feet long, flew out of the divine light barrier with 2 purple wings of light that blotted out the sky and arrived in the void. Swoosh! This majestic black dragon warship was Tian Shu's flagship. It flew into the void of space and stopped above the numerous fleets. When the nearby warships saw the black dragon warship, they immediately cheered. Many of the soldiers relaxed, revealing expressions of relief. There was no doubt that the Crown Prince and Empress had finally arrived. Ka. The black dragon warship's hatch opened. Tian Shu, who was 10 feet tall, strode out with his head held high. Following closely behind him was the 8-foot-tall, graceful Yun Shuiyin. The mother and son walked to the bow of the warship and stood there, frowning as they looked into the depths of the sky. When they saw the dazzling meteor, their faces turned gloomy. Their eyes were filled with vigilance and doubt. Tian Shu said in a low voice, "Meteors are common, but this is the first time I've seen such a huge meteor. Also, that meteor didn't appear earlier or later. It just had to appear now. Mother, I feel that there's something wrong with that meteor." Yun Shuiyin nodded slightly, agreeing with what he said. Almost all meteors are fragments of stars. When they travel through the void at high speed, they will ignite with the divine flames of the heavens and become smaller and smaller. That meteor doesn't look like a star fragment. It looks more like a complete star. Also, that meteor is accelerating. Its target is Planet Heaven Punisher. Its intentions are obvious. Mother, are you saying that the meteor is coming for us? Tian Shu raised his eyebrows and asked coldly, "Could that be Ji Tianxing's doing?" Before Yun Shuiyin could answer, he shook his head and said in disbelief, "No, that's impossible. No matter how powerful Ji Tianxing is, he can't break through the heavenly Tao's laws. How can he control of Heaven Punisher? Even a true heavenly god can't control of heaven god of Heaven Punisher." Yun Shuiyin nodded again and said with a heavy tone, "Back when Mother broke through to the Divine Lord realm, she was able to use her divine powers and use the stars as weapons. Ordinary heavenly gods don't have that ability. Therefore, Ji Tianxing can't control of Heaven Punisher to attack us." Tian Shu calmed down and asked again, "If that's the case, that meteor was an accident? Just a coincidence?" "That's not entirely true." Yun Shuiyin shook her head and said solemnly, "Although Ji Tianxing doesn't have that ability, his origins are mysterious and unfathomable. He has all kinds of divine abilities. That meteor's arrival is so coincidental. It's most likely related to him." "Damn it," Tian Shu cursed and clenched his fists. His heart was filled with shock and jealousy. What kind of monster is that bastard? Why does he have so many despicable methods? Yin Shuiyin understood her son's feelings, but she couldn't enlighten him. She said calmly, with that meteor's speed, it will hit Planet Heaven Punisher in 20 hours at most. With the size of that meteor, once it hit the Heaven Punishing Star, it would definitely bring disaster to the Heaven Punishing Star. When that happens, Planet Heaven Punisher's divine light barrier will be destroyed. The 3 seas will be overturned, and more than half of the 5 continents will be submerged. Planet Heaven Punisher will collapse like the end of the world. At least 10 billion people will die. Tian Shu was alarmed and anxious. He hurriedly asked, "Mother, what should we do?" Yun Shuiyin shook her head calmly and said, "If Mother recovers her divine Lord's strength, she can control Planet Heaven Punisher to move 100 million miles to avoid the meteor's attack. Or she can use a great divine ability to intercept the meteor or even shatter it. Unfortunately, with Mother's current strength, she can neither teleport Planet Heaven Punisher nor intercept the meteor." Tian Shu became more and more anxious. He glanced at the countless warships in the void and had an idea. "Mother, before the meteor approaches, I'll give the order. Let 100,000 warships use all their firepower to bombard the meteor at all costs. We will definitely be able to destroy it. Even if we can't destroy the meteor, we can weaken its power and minimize the losses." Yin Shuiyin thought for a moment and nodded slightly. It seems that this is the only way now. However, the meteor is still very far away. The warship's attack range is only tens of thousands of miles. You must immediately give the order for all the warships to meet it. Once they are within range, they will attack with all their might. Tian Shu was stunned. His expression turned ugly. Only then did he remember that the warship's attack range was only tens of thousands of miles. It would only be effective when they were very close to the meteor. If all the warships meet it, they will only be able to fire a few shots before being hit by the meteor. They won't even have time to escape. If we do that, won't we be sending tens of millions of soldiers to their deaths? Tian Shu looked at Yun Shuiyin with burning eyes. He instinctively objected to this decision. However, Yun Shuiyin looked into the void and said indifferently, "The 30 million soldiers that were summoned back to Planet Heaven Punisher are destined to be sacrificed for Planet Heaven Punisher. Should we sacrifice tens of millions of soldiers to intercept the meteor or watch the meteor hit Planet Heaven Punisher and cause the deaths of 10 billion people? It depends on your choice." Tian Shu's body stiffened. He revealed a pained and hesitant expression. His heart was filled with struggle. He was silent for a long time before he took a deep breath. He gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Forget it. Isn't the purpose of our soldiers' existence to protect our homeland and our people? Now that they are sacrificing themselves to protect Planet Heaven Punisher, it is a worthy death. I will remember this hatred forever. Tian Shu's expression was resolute as he growled in a firm tone. As soon as he finished speaking, he took out 5 communication jade slips and issued orders to the 5 temporary commanders. Order all the warships and all the soldiers to take action immediately to intercept the meteor. Chapter 27-22. No one in the Heaven Punisher race knew what had happened to the golden meteor. Even Yun Shuiyin, who was the strongest and had the highest status, did not believe that it was Ji Tianxing's doing. However, she was certain that the golden meteor's attack was not an accident. It must have something to do with Ji Tianxing. Reality proved that she had guessed correctly. The shining golden meteor was indeed a complete star. Moreover, Ji Tianxing had spent a few months to find it in the Heaven Punisher star zone. Back then, he had discovered that the Heaven Punisher fleets from various worlds had retreated with large amounts of resources, so he had decided to head straight for Planet Heaven Punisher. However, he was alone and weak. He only had a few helpers and 4 divine beasts. Even if Ji Wuhin and Ji Wushuang were included, they only had 10 true god experts. How could 10 true god experts exterminate 30 billion Heaven Punishers and destroy the entire Planet Heaven Punisher? That was an impossible mission. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had expected this day to come. Back then, when he had traversed through the void and traversed through various major star zones, he had encountered countless void storms, folded spaces, and black holes. He had also discovered countless planets with abundant resources. Moreover, he had refined dozens of planets and increased the power of the five elements world by nearly 10 times. At that time, he had already thought of a plan. In the Heaven Punisher star zone, he had found a planet with a diameter of 100 million miles. This planet contained abundant metal resources and was extremely hard and sturdy. Ji Tianxing did not refine this planet. Instead, he used the power of the five elements world to drag the planet away. He controlled the five elements world to drag the metal planet and stopped 600 million miles away from planet Heaven Punisher. The five elements world stopped in the void. Then, he used the power of the five elements world to push the metal planet toward planet Heaven Punisher. The golden power of the five elements world enveloped the planet, causing it to shine with golden light like a golden meteor. Under Ji Tianxing's push, the golden meteor continued to accelerate and crash toward planet Heaven Punisher with unstoppable momentum. This was the first step of Ji Tianxing's plan. He called it the meteor plan. Once the plan succeeded, the meteor would collide with the heaven-punishing star, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Not only would the divine light barrier of planet Heaven Trader crumble, but the entire planet would also welcome its doomsday, and all life would be plunged into misery and suffering. That way, Ji Tianxing would be able to kill 10 billion Heaven Punishers without using a single soldier and plunge the entire planet Heaven Punisher into chaos. This plan was very bold and sinister. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and the others exclaimed in shock after they learned about Ji Tianxing's idea. Everyone believed that the Heaven Punishers would not be able to guard against them and would not be able to do anything. The meteor plan would definitely succeed. After all, in the entire Trichiliocosm, Ji Tianxing was the only one who could control the power of the world and control the stars. He was the only one who could carry out the meteor plan and accomplish such a magnificent feat. At this moment, the golden meteor was speeding through the void and was still accelerating. No one knew that there was a handsome young man in a white robe standing on the golden meteor. He was none other than Ji Tianxing. He stood in the turbulent golden light and stared at planet Heaven Punisher, which was 300 million miles away, with a cold smile on his face. The meteor plan is only the first step of my plan. After this, I will carry out the second step of the plan. Then, I will give you an even bigger surprise. Ji Tianxing's heart was filled with anticipation as he thought of this. He raised his palms and released a vast amount of the power of the world, which he infused into the golden light. It's not fast enough. I have to go faster. Only when it's fast enough, the impact will be more powerful, and the destructive power will be even more terrifying. As time passed, the golden meteor continued to accelerate. At the same time, the distance between the meteor and planet Heaven Punisher continued to shorten. 300 million miles, 200 million miles, 100 million miles, 150 million miles. However, the power of the world in Ji Tianxing's body was getting weaker and weaker. When a meteor was 100 million miles away from planet Heaven Punisher, his power of the world was finally exhausted. With his current strength, he could only store so much power of the world. He had already tried his best. The five elements world stopped in the void a few 100 million miles away. It was too far away from him. He could not draw on the power of the five elements world to continue accelerating the meteor. However, he was already satisfied with his speed. Although the meteor is still 100 million miles away from planet Heaven Punisher, I can't accelerate it anymore. However, the meteor will continue to crash into planet Heaven Punisher under the terrifying inertia. Even if its speed will decrease, it will not be a big deal. Planet Heaven Punisher will not be able to escape this disaster. Ji Tianxing looked at planet Heaven Punisher with bright eyes, and a cold smile appeared on his face. However, the next moment, the smile on his face disappeared. He suddenly saw a purple light that covered the sky in the dark void in front of him. What is that? The army of the Heaven Punisher? He immediately frowned and observed the purple light with a sharp gaze. It should be the army of the Heaven Punisher. After all, the Heaven Punisher has already withdrawn their defenses and is guarding planet Heaven Punisher. This meteor is so huge and so dazzling in the void. The Heaven Punisher must have discovered it long ago. Ji Tianxing observed for a while and saw that the purple light that covered the sky was an endless number of battleships. However, he was not worried at all. This result was also within his expectations. Idiots of the Heaven Punisher. Even if they send out millions of troops, what's the use? How can those battleships stop this huge meteor? They're simply sending themselves to their deaths. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as a look of contempt flashed across his eyes. Very quickly, for hours passed. The distance between the meteor and planet Heaven Punisher was shortened to 50 million miles. At this moment, the 100,000 battleships finally arrived and were about to collide with the meteor. Ji Tianxing stood at the top of the meteor and clearly saw that the 100,000 battleships were divided into 5 large fleets that were arranged in a triangular formation. Each fleet had 20,000 battleships. When they gathered together, they covered 1,000,000 miles of the void and were extremely powerful. However, no matter how big the fleets were, they were not worth mentioning when compared to the meteor that was 100 million miles in diameter. The difference between the two was like a millstone and a cockroach. No matter how powerful a cockroach was and how determined it was to die, it would not be able to move a millstone. Soon, the first fleet met the meteor. This was the Southern Expedition Fleet, led by Lord Jiao, Tianshu's cousin. When the fleet was 100,000 miles away from the meteor, Lord Jiao shouted at the top of his lungs and gave the order to attack. All soldiers, listen to my command. Attack the meteor with all your might, no matter the cost. For the glory of our race, and for the 30 billion people of our race, we will die with no regrets. His solemn and resolute roar was transmitted to the 20,000 battleships through a special array. In an instant, the 2 million soldiers of the Heaven Punisher were united. They were ready to die and release their most powerful divine cannons. Chapter 27-23. Boom, 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 boom. Tens of thousands of dazzling purple light beams tore through the dark sky like lightning and shot toward the golden meteor. The light beams that were as dense as raindrops created light shadows that were tens of thousands of miles long in the sky. It was extremely dazzling. Not only that, but the 20,000 captains in golden armor also flew out of the battleships. They held divine weapons in their hands and unleashed the strongest divine power in their lives. They used all kinds of trump cards and forbidden divine powers to attack the golden meteor. After all, it was like throwing an egg against a rock. They would definitely die. Then, they would die even more brilliantly. Before they died, they unleashed all the forbidden divine powers that they had never used before and all kinds of consummate skills that would consume their lifespan and cultivation power. 2 breaths later, the divine spell light shadows, sword radiance, and tens of thousands of purple light beams all hit the golden meteor. Boom, 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 boom. Earth-shattering sounds exploded in the sky and shook 1,000,000 miles. The terrifying sound waves formed visible ripples that caused countless heaven-punishing soldiers to bleed from their orifices. Even the captains in the martial god realm were dizzy from the shock. In the blink of an eye, the divine spell light shadows and tens of thousands of purple light beams all collapsed. The sacred golden light that enveloped the meteor also splashed out golden fragments that covered the sky and earth. Billions of purple and golden fragments mixed together and created a hurricane that swept across 1,000,000 miles of the sky. Such a destructive shockwave caused countless battleships to sway from side to side. However, before the soldiers could take control of the battleships and get into formation, before they could attack again and release the powerful divine cannons, the golden meteor had already arrived and quickly crushed the entire fleet. Boom, boom. In just 10 breaths, the 20,000 battleships were crushed one after another, and all of them collapsed. The battleships exploded and turned into tens of thousands of pieces that scattered in the sky. The soldiers hiding in the battleships were also smashed into pieces of flesh and blood. They were mixed with the pieces of the battleships and scattered in the sky. The 20,000 battleships and 2 million soldiers turned into pieces that covered 1,000,000 miles of the sky. However, in the blink of an eye, the debris that blotted out the sky was burned to ashes by the sacred golden light, turning into fine powder and dust that drifted in the void. The entire Southern Expedition fleet was annihilated. From the martial Sage Realm warriors to the 9th Wang Ye, who was a level 4 true God Realm warrior, they had all perished in the void. They had suffered such heavy losses in such a short period of time. This was something that had never happened in the history of the Heaven-Punishing Clan. It could be said to be the greatest tragedy in history. Moreover, the sacrifice of 2 million heaven-conquering soldiers did not achieve much in return. The divine golden light that enveloped the meteor was still surging and dazzling. The speed of the golden meteor didn't change much. It didn't slow down at all. In the void millions of miles away, Sky Pivot's Black Dragon warship was following behind the two fleets, flying towards the meteor. Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin stood at the bow of the ship, staring at the rapidly approaching golden meteor with grave expressions. The mother and son witnessed the tragic scene of the destruction of the Southern Expedition fleet with their own eyes. Their hearts were filled with shock, and their eyes were filled with deep disappointment. They had not expected the power of the golden meteor to be so terrifying. 2 million soldiers of the Heaven-Punishing Clan had been so easily crushed and turned into ashes in an instant. However, the sacrifice of the soldiers was in vain, and the speed of the golden meteor did not slow down. This made the mother and son's hearts clench, and deep worry appeared on their faces. 100 breaths later, two majestic fleets met the meteor head-on. They were the Eastern Expedition Fleet and the Western Expedition Fleet. 40,000 warships and 4 million soldiers of the Heaven-Punishing Clan were divided into two square formations, one on the left and the other on the right. They charged towards the golden meteor fearlessly. When the two sides were 100,000 miles apart, the two temporary commanders roared hoarsely and gave the order to all the soldiers to attack. Immediately, the 40,000 warships used up all their divine stones and released the most dazzling and powerful divine cannons. Nearly 100,000 dark purple light beams rained down on the meteor like a rain of arrows that blotted out the sky. The 40,000 captains in golden armor did not hesitate to burn their divine bodies and their lifelong skills as they charged fearlessly towards the golden meteor. In the next instant, the 100,000 light beams hit the golden meteor one after another. The 40,000 captains were also like moths to a flame. They released their last brilliance and exploded with their strongest power to hit the golden meteor. Boom, 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 boom. A series of earth-shattering noises burst out and converged into a terrifying sound wave that shook the void 3 million miles away. Millions of soldiers were bleeding from their 7 orifices and seeing stars. Their consciousness was blurry and confused. However, this did not stop the 40,000 warships from increasing their speed to the maximum and crashing into the golden meteor. Boom! Another earth-shattering noise was heard. Batch after batch of warships, like black ants, collided head-on with the golden meteors. Then, they were smashed into billions of pieces by the golden meteor. The scene of the Southern Expedition fleet being destroyed was replayed in the void again. However, the scene this time was even more dazzling and magnificent. A total of 40,000 warships and 4 million soldiers of the Heaven-Punishing Clan were instantly smashed into pieces and killed. The space within a radius of 3 million miles was now covered in metal shreds and broken pieces of flesh. Then, the golden meteor smashed through. The surging divine golden light was like a world-destroying divine flame, burning all the debris into powder. The void within a 3 million mile radius was also cleansed and became clean. The Eastern and Western expeditionary fleets were destroyed just like that. On the Black Dragon warship, Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin witnessed this tragic scene with their own eyes. Their expressions were extremely gloomy and their hearts were bleeding. Fortunately, the sacrifice of the 4 million soldiers of the heaven-punishing clan finally paid off and showed their worth. A huge gap was blasted open in the sacred golden light that enveloped the meteor. The gap was 1,000,000 miles wide, and the golden light inside was thin. Through the gap, one could clearly see the uneven surface of the star that was covered with metal and rocks. Moreover, the speed of the golden meteor had obviously slowed down. The facts proved that Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyan's decision was right. The mother and son both looked relieved and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The remaining Northern Expedition Fleet and the Guardian Fleet were also overjoyed, and their morale was greatly boosted when they saw the meteor slowing down. After all, they were going to die without a doubt. If their deaths were worthwhile and meaningful, then they would be satisfied. Therefore, the two fleets desperately accelerated and bravely rushed toward the golden meteor like moths to a flame. At the peak of the meteor, Ji Tianxing could not help but frown when he saw this scene. Damn it, the sacrifice of millions of soldiers of the heaven-punishing clan slowed down the meteor after all. My power of the realm has been exhausted, so I can't accelerate the meteor or manipulate it to change its direction. It can only rely on inertia to hit the heaven-punishing clan. After its speed is reduced, its destructive power is also greatly reduced. Chapter 27-24. Ji Tianxing was a bit worried, but he couldn't change the outcome. The meteor plan would definitely succeed. However, the sacrifice of tens of millions of soldiers would definitely slow down the meteor. Even if it hit the planet of the damned, its destructive power would be reduced. Fortunately, this was only the first step of the plan. Ji Tianxing would be satisfied if he could kill tens of millions of soldiers of the damned and then hit the planet of the damned. Then, he would carry out the second step of the plan. At this moment, the North Conquering Fleet and the National Protecting Fleet were about 100,000 miles away from the meteor. The two temporary commanders-in-chief gave the order with great momentum. The 4 million soldiers were full of fighting spirit. They activated the battleships with all their might and released the destructive cannons. Boom, boom, boom. Almost 100,000 dazzling purple pillars of light shot toward the golden meteor like a rain of arrows. The 40,000 captains of the battleships who were at the martial god realm also burned their blood and energy to release their most powerful attacks. Many of the captains even flew toward the meteors and self-destructed. Boom, 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 boom. The next moment, the purple pillars of light that blotted out the sky, as well as tens of thousands of figures shining with purple light, all struck the golden meteor. An earth-shattering sound exploded in the sky and spread a few 100,000 miles. Ripples that could be seen with the naked eye appeared in the dark and icy void. Then, the golden meteor rolled over and crushed the 40,000 battleships unstoppably. Muffled rumbling sounds could be heard incessantly. Pile after pile of battleships were blasted into smithereens, and countless heaven-conquering soldiers were crushed into pieces. In just 10 seconds, the 40,000 battleships were destroyed, and the 4 million soldiers of the dam died on the spot. The raging golden light swept across, burning all the debris within a radius of millions of miles into powder and dust. The North Conquering Fleet and the National Protecting Fleet were also destroyed. The 5 most famous fleets of the damned were destroyed. On the Black Dragon battleship, Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyan witnessed the sacrifice of tens of millions of soldiers with their own eyes. However, the sacrifice of the North Conquering Fleet and the National Protecting Fleet was worth it after all. The sacred golden light enveloping the meteor was about to be used up and became very thin. After this bombardment, the golden light within a radius of millions of kilometers disappeared. Even the surface of the planet that was full of metals and rocks had been blown into hundreds of thousands of craters, with endless broken stones splashing out. Looking from the void, a huge crater with a radius of millions of miles had appeared on the surface of the planet. Just like an apple that had been bitten, the previously dazzling golden meteor had now dimmed. Not only that, the speed of the meteor slowed down again. Compared to the beginning, The speed of a meteor had decreased by half. Seeing this result, Ji Tianqing frowned even more. As for Yun Shuiyin and Tian Shu, despite their heavy hearts, they felt a little more hopeful. 10 million soldiers of the 5 fleets sacrificed themselves to protect Planet Heaven Destroyer. They're the heroes of our race. The younger generation will remember them forever. Tian Shu stood at the bow of the ship and looked at the incoming meteor as he shouted in a deep voice. Yun Shuiyin nodded slightly and said, "If not for their sacrifice, the Heaven Destroyer planet would have faced its end and descended into chaos. At least 10 billion people would die in the chaos and calamity. Now, the meteor's speed has decreased by half. Even if it hits Planet Heaven Destroyer, the consequences will be greatly reduced, and the number of casualties will be greatly reduced." Tian Shu nodded and said, "Mother, the meteor is only a few million miles away. We should retreat." Although he had piloted the Black Dragon warship and followed the 5 fleets to face the incoming meteor together, he was trying to raise morale. He was trying to boost morale. 10 million soldiers could be sacrificed, but he was the young emperor of the Heaven Destroyer clan. How could he be a moth to a flame? His mission had been completed. Of course, he had to retreat. However, Yun Shuiyin shook her head and said solemnly, "Tian Shu, your Black Dragon warship is at the heavenly god level. It is far more useful than 100,000 soldiers. Before we retreat, take control of the Black Dragon warship and release your strongest attack at all costs. Make another contribution to Planet Heaven Destroyer." With that, Yun Shuiyin left the Black Dragon warship and flew toward the meteor. Tian Shu was shocked. He quickly grabbed her wrist and asked anxiously, "Mother, where are you going?" Yun Shuiyin looked back at him and said with a smile, "Mother, as the strongest person in the Heaven Destroyer clan, of course, I have to make a contribution." "No." Tian Shu's eyes turned red. He shook his head and said, "Mother, you can't do that. You are the supreme of 10,000 mouths. You have to kill Ji Tianqing with me to avenge father." Clearly, Tian Shu had misunderstood. He thought that Yun Shuiyin was going to sacrifice herself to block the meteor. Yun Shuiyin shook her head and said with a smile, "Tian Shu, what are you thinking? How could Imperial Mother do such a stupid thing? Don't worry, I will only do my best. I won't let myself get hurt." Tian Shu heaved a sigh of relief and said solemnly, "Mother, you can't block the meteor head-on. You won't be able to retreat in time." Yun Shuiyin nodded and said, "Of course I know that. I will attack from the side and try my best to divert the meteor from its original trajectory and change its direction." After saying that, she flew into the void without looking back and flew towards the meteor. Tian Shu didn't waste any more time and returned to the Black Dragon battleship. He personally steered the battleship 1,000,000 miles to the left and launched an attack from the side. When a meteor was still 400,000 miles away, he had already activated the Black Dragon battleship with all his might and released his strongest attack. Boom! Boom! With 2 earth-shattering explosions, the Black Dragon battleship's main cannon spewed out endless dark purple light. The 2 extremely dense purple lights formed 2 purple dragons that were 1,000 miles long. They charged at the meteor with unparalleled force. Kaboom! 2 seconds later, 2 dark purple dragon shadows over 1,000 miles long struck the meteor. With a deafening explosion, 2 huge craters appeared on the surface of the meteor. Countless pieces of rubble flew out. The meteor shook a few times and seemed to slow down a little. Moreover, the meteor's trajectory had deviated by about 10,000 miles. Tian Shu was already very satisfied with this result. Without hesitation, he steered the Black Dragon battleship and teleported 100,000 miles away. At the same time, the gigantic meteor brushed past the Black Dragon battleship. The incomparably violent impact swept the Black Dragon battleship away, causing it to tumble continuously in the void. However, Tian Shu wasn't injured. His gaze was fixed on a void hundreds of thousands of miles away. There, Yun Shuiyin had transformed into a 1,000-mile-tall ice giant. She used all of her power without holding back and unleashed her most powerful skill. She unleashed two gigantic palms that covered the sky and smashed onto the shooting star. Star-seizing palm. It was a skill she was proud of when she was a Divine Lord powerhouse in the Divine Realm. With her strength as a Divine Lord, she could literally pluck the stars from the sky with her hands. Please give me your recommendation tickets and monthly tickets. Into chapter. Chapter 2725. Kaboom! Following two resounding booms that shook the nine heavens, the two gargantuan palms that encompassed a radius of over 5,000 kilometers also collapsed. Endless shards of divine light burst forth along with a loud bang, covering millions of miles of space. Yun Shuyan's strongest attack failed to shatter the meteor or stop it from flying. After all, she hadn't reached the heavenly god realm yet. Even a heavenly god realm expert wouldn't be able to stop the meteor. However, Yin Shuyan's most powerful attack was finally effective. On the surface of the meteor, two 5 million miles wide holes were created, with metal and rock fragments splashing out. The size of the meteor shrank, and its trajectory shifted by nearly 10,000 miles. This was Yun Shuyan's limit. She had tried her best. She retreated without hesitation after unleashing those two palms that could destroy the heavens and earth. Even so, the terrifying impact of the meteor still swept her away. She tumbled in the void for a few million miles before coming to a stop. When she returned to the Black Dragon battleship and reunited with Tian Shu, the meteor was only 10 million miles away from the Heaven Punisher planet. The only thing the mother and son could do was steer the Black Dragon battleship away from the Heaven Punisher planet to avoid being injured by the shockwave. At the same time, Ji Tianxing, who was standing on top of the meteor, also flew into the void. Swoosh! He teleported for 100,000 miles and continued to fly for another million miles before stopping in the void. 2 hours later, the three experts chose a location and stopped 20 million miles away from the Heaven Punisher planet. They quietly watched the meteor crash into the Heaven Punisher planet. Boom! Along with an earth-shaking, earth-shattering sound, there was a loud explosion. The dim meteor finally crashed into the Heaven Punisher planet. In that instant, a terrifying sound wave spread out for over 100 million miles. A blinding purple light burst into the surroundings and shrouded the rift within 200 million li. Under the watchful eyes of Ji Tianxing, Tian Shu, and Yun Shuyan, the purple barrier covering the Heaven Punisher planet was shattered by the meteor. The originally calm Heaven Punisher planet trembled violently from the impact. It tumbled forward for tens of millions of miles. Even though the shooting star had already deviated from its original trajectory and moved more than 10,000 miles away. However, planet FA was 7 times bigger than it, so it still crashed into the southern hemisphere of planet FA. Dazzling purple light and flames erupted in the southern hemisphere, sweeping across hundreds of millions of kilometers. Everyone saw with their own eyes that the southern hemisphere of planet Heaven FA had been smashed into pieces, and millions of ravines and deep pits had been formed. The vast continents and mountains were blasted into pieces and powder. The endless forests and thousands of cities and kingdoms were instantly annihilated. Even the sea around the continent was swept up in huge waves that spread out in all directions. After an entire hour, only then did the heaven-punishing star dissipate the terrifying impact and gradually stopped rolling. It stopped in the void 100 million li away. The incomparably huge meteor also fell apart because of this, turning into endless fragments that scattered in the dark void. The meteor collapsed. However, the calamity on planet Heaven FA did not stop there. The continents and seas within a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers were all destroyed in the earth-shattering collision. Billions of people of planet FA, as well as countless sea beasts and demonic beasts, were instantly turned into ashes. The vast continents fell apart and collapsed. Lava and flames surged out from the depths of the earth. Huge waves swept up in the vast sea and quickly drowned the shattered continents. The sky collapsed, the earth collapsed, and lava and flames surged out from the ground. The entire planet Heaven FA was plunged into misery and suffering. The Southern Hemisphere suffered the heaviest losses. At least 3 billion people died on the spot. Not even their corpses remained. More than 2 billion people were severely injured, but they did not die for the time being. They were still alive. However, in an extremely harsh and dangerous environment, they could not effectively save themselves. They were not far from death. Other than that, the northern hemisphere of planet Heaven FA also suffered a huge impact, although the northern hemisphere was not directly hit by the meteor. However, the destructive impact also caused the continents in the northern hemisphere to shatter. Huge waves rose up in the sea. Countless cities and kingdoms were destroyed by the massive impact, turning into endless ruins. As the continents were crushed and crushed, scenes of volcanoes erupting, lava rising into the sky, and flames burning the sky appeared in countless regions. As a result, the cities and kingdoms that were still in chaos and had suffered heavy casualties were immediately burned to the ground. Hundreds of millions of people and creatures of planet Heaven FA were turned into ashes in this disaster. After 6 hours, planet Heaven FA gradually calmed down. The previously peaceful and tranquil star was now riddled with holes and filled with devastation. The northern half of the planet was still protected by the purple light barrier, but the southern half was covered by rolling black clouds and gloomy clouds. After suffering such a destructive blow, planet Heaven FA fell into extreme chaos and would not be able to recover for a year and a half. More than 6 billion people died on the spot. More than 5 billion people were severely injured or lost their homes. Even more than 20,000 planet Heaven FA battleships that guarded the sky were affected. Most of them were destroyed. Such heavy losses could be said to be the worst in history. Fortunately, the 10 million soldiers of the 5 fleets sacrificed their lives to slow down the meteor's speed. Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin used all their strength to slightly change the meteor's trajectory. Otherwise, planet Heaven FA's losses would be even worse. The number of casualties would increase by 40%. At this time, the Black Dragon battleship had already turned around and sped toward planet Heaven FA. The losses of planet Heaven FA were basically in line with Yun Shuiyan's expectations. Although it was tragic, it was still acceptable. She and Tian Shu did not have time to be angry. They only wanted to rush back to planet Heaven FA as soon as possible to maintain the overall situation and stability. Moreover, Yin Shuiyin was also on guard against Ji Tianxing taking advantage of the situation to attack. She had to rush back to the Arch Palace and start the emergency defense plan. At the same time, Ji Tianxing, who was standing in the void and watching the entire process, turned into a white shadow and rushed toward planet Heaven FA. The meteor plan is completed, although the effect is slightly reduced. Planet Heaven FA suffered heavy casualties and fell into extreme chaos. More than half of the divine light barrier that covered the entire planet was destroyed by the meteor. Now that the first step of the plan is completed, it's time to move on to the second step. Ji Tianxing rushed toward planet Heaven FA as he calculated in his heart. Given the situation on planet Heaven FA, it will not be peaceful for at least 2 months. Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin will also not be able to form an effective defense. 2 months should be enough for me. Ji Tianxing murmured to himself. His eyes were filled with anticipation. The second step of his plan was more vicious than the meteor plan, and its momentum would be even more earth-shattering. Once the plan succeeded, the consequences would be 10 times or 100 times more terrifying than the meteor plan. It was almost impossible to complete the plan in the mortal world. Only the divine lords and divine kings in the 9 heavens had the ability to achieve it. He called the second step the Black Hole Plan. Chapter 27-26. It was half a day later when the Black Dragon battleship returned to planet Heaven Trader. 2 of the 5 continents on planet Heaven Trader had been submerged by the boundless ocean. The 3 continents that were lucky enough to survive were also in chaos. The people couldn't find soldiers or generals, and the generals had lost their commander and had no idea what to do. The people of planet Heaven Trader could only run for their lives. Under the leadership of countless fleets and experts, they fled to a relatively safe area. The experts of the continents, kingdoms, and cities only knew how to protect the survivors first. After settling the survivors, they could then rush to the scorched earth ruins to rescue those who were on the verge of death. Yun Shuiyan and Tian Shu returned to the Emperor God Palace and immediately issued a series of orders. At the same time, Tian Shu also mobilized more than 10,000 battleships and 2 million soldiers to the continents to rescue them. The remaining 10,000 battleships and 2 million soldiers all retreated to the vicinity of the Emperor God Palace. Yun Shuiyan had a strong premonition that Ji Tianxing would soon come after the meteor hit planet Heaven Trader. Therefore, she activated all the defenses of the Emperor God Palace and gathered all the forces. She was waiting for Ji Tianxing to come and fight him to the death. However, 3 days had passed, and Ji Tianxing still hadn't appeared. The Heaven Trader fleet guarding the Emperor God Palace was also puzzled and confused. Planet Heaven Trader had been hit by the meteor and suffered such a great disaster. Why didn't the Empress send them to rescue people? Why did she let them guard the Emperor God Palace and wait for a few days? This was too strange. Could it be that the Empress was afraid that someone would take the opportunity to overthrow the Emperor God Palace's authority? Or was there a powerful enemy attacking the Emperor God Palace? The 2 million soldiers were confused. However, they didn't dare to guess and could only obey the orders. In fact, Yin Shuiyan's guess was right. She and Tian Shu had just returned to planet Heaven Trader when Ji Tianxing entered planet Heaven Trader 2 hours later. Ji Tianxing landed on the Blackwater Sea in the southern hemisphere, on a small island with a radius of less than 10 miles. Originally, this sea area had hundreds of thousands of islands of different sizes. The large islands had a radius of a few million miles, where close to 10 million warriors and civilians lived. Even the smallest island was tens of thousands of miles long, enough for hundreds of thousands of civilians and martial artists to survive. However, after the meteor struck the Heaven Punisher planet, this sea region was completely destroyed. Millions of islands fell apart and sank into the sea. The island under Ji Tianxing's feet originally had a radius of 500,000 kilometers. More than 4 million cultivators lived there, and several cities were built there. But now, the island had completely disintegrated, with only the tip of the island sticking out of the sea. There were still hundreds of thousands of martial artists who were lucky enough to survive in the cold, black seawater. They were still struggling with severe injuries. Ji Tianxing released tens of thousands of bolts of divine lightning, which enveloped the vast ocean. In a short while, the struggling Heaven Punisher martial artists were all dead. Shua! Ji Tianxing dived into the black seawater and dived into the depths of the sea. The sea was 100,000 zhang deep, and the seabed was pitch black like ink. It was bone-piercingly cold, and the pressure was incomparably huge. However, he was not affected at all. He easily dove to the bottom of the sea and drilled into the dark, hard rock layer. Even though he had encountered many sea beasts and surviving heaven destroyers along the way, he could not be bothered to waste time. He directly drilled into the ground and went deep into the planet's core. Compared to killing the Heaven Punishers, the Black Hole Plan was more important. Even if he killed day and night, he could only kill a few 100 million Heaven Punishers in a year. However, once the Black Hole Plan succeeded, the entire Heaven Punisher planet would be destroyed. At that time, more than 20 billion Heaven Punishers would be annihilated. Wouldn't that be tens of thousands of times faster and more efficient than killing them himself? Swish! Ji Tianxing used the law of Earth. His body turned into a beam of dark yellow divine light as he quickly traveled underground. The deeper he went, the harder the rock layer, which was full of ores and metals, became. As a result, the resistance to diving would increase, and the speed would also decrease. However, this was only for ordinary martial artists and immortal beings. A true god like Ji Tianxing, who had mastered the law of Earth, could travel hundreds of millions of miles without any hindrance. 3 days later, Ji Tianxing dived for 800,000 miles and reached the bottom of the rock layer. He was about to enter the lava area. 10 days later, Ji Tianxing went through a few million miles of lava and reached 4 million miles underground. He entered the core of the planet. A month later, he continued to travel in the depths of the planet's core and wandered in the endless lava. 2 months, 3 months, for months went by. Half a year had passed since the meteor hit Heaven Punisher planet. The 3 continents that were lucky enough to survive gradually returned to peace. Billions of wounded were treated, and countless cities and kingdoms that had been destroyed were being reconstructed. Overall, the Heaven Punishers had withstood the calamity and were recuperating. The Arch Palace had been peaceful. The grand sacrificial ceremony was always ready, and 2 million soldiers were guarding it. But none of that was useful. Yun Shuiyan, Tian Shu, and the soldiers had waited for half a year in vain. Tian Shu's heart and mind were filled with shame and anger. He felt that he had been fooled by Ji Tianxing. He was like a frightened bird and a clown. He seemed very timid and weak. Many soldiers and guards talked behind his back, which also made him angry. He hated Ji Tianxing to the core. However, Ji Tianxing did not show up. He had nowhere to vent his anger. Yin Shuiyan was very calm. She kept comforting him and telling him not to let down his guard. At this moment, Ji Tianxing had reached the depths of the planet's core and was searching for the world's core in the endless sea of lava. That's right, this was part of the black hole plan. Ji Tianxing was bold and bold. He wanted to sneak into Heaven Punisher planet and refine the world's core, although he also knew that this mission could not be completed in a short time. He did not expect to completely refine Heaven Punisher planet like he did with the 5 Elements world. He only needed to use a little trick to control the world's power of Heaven Punisher planet. That would be enough. Day after day, month after month. Another 3 months passed. Ji Tianxing searched through the vast sea of lava, covering a radius of 100 million miles. Finally, one day in the 4th month, he suddenly sensed a special power fluctuation in the sea of lava tens of thousands of miles away. The mysterious and special power aura was very familiar to him. It was the power of the world. Ji Tianxing was overjoyed. He sped up and flew to the source of the aura. Not long after, he found the source of the power of the world. It was a huge lava whirlpool that was crazily devouring the surrounding lava. The whirlpool was unfathomable. No one knew where it led. If it were other true gods, they would not dare to enter rashly. Otherwise, they would be in danger of losing their lives. However, Ji Tianxing was not afraid at all. He leaped into the whirlpool without hesitation. Swoosh! With a flash of red light, Ji Tianxing's figure disappeared in the endless lava. Chapter 27:27. Swoosh! There was a flash of light. The darkness in front of Ji Tianxing dissipated, and light returned. All around him, above and below him, there was a dazzling purple light. Ji Tianxing opened his eyes and looked around. The situation was just as he had expected. He was currently in a huge ball of purple light with a radius of 70,000 miles. The condensed sacred purple light formed a spherical wall of light, like an indestructible heavenly curtain. The boundless scarlet lava was blocked by the purple light barrier as it churned violently. However, the 70,000 miles of space inside the ball of light was very spacious. The air was filled with strands of purple light, like clouds and flowing water, slowly flowing. In the middle of the ground, there was a sacred mountain that was 1,000 feet tall and was dark purple in color. Billions of 5-colored veins extended from the foot of the mountain and spread out like veins, covering tens of thousands of miles of space. This special space was filled with the sacred power of the world, but there were no living creatures. It was dead silent. Ji Tianxing looked at the sacred purple mountain in the distance, and a gratified smile appeared on his face. Just as I expected, Planet Killer is the same as the 5 Elements world. There is a special space deep in the Earth's core. It is the core of the world. I came prepared and spent almost a year to find the core of the world. However, the elites of the Heaven Lawless race do not know about the existence of the core of the world, nor do they know where to find it. Even if they knew, they would not be able to come here without the strength of a godly king. Elites who had not reached the godly king realm would be killed by the power of the world after entering the lava whirlpool. However, Ji Tianqing was different. He had already merged with the five-element world. As long as the five-elements world was not destroyed, he would not die. Planet Killer was much smaller and weaker than the five-elements world. It could not destroy the five-elements world. Therefore, Ji Tianqing was able to come here unscathed. He collected his thoughts and flew toward the sacred Purple Mountain. The core of the Five Elements world was gold, while Planet Killer's was purple. Although the two mountains had different colors, their effects and power were equally powerful. Ji Tianqing flew to the peak of Mount Indigo and sat cross-legged on the mountain peak. He began to circulate and refine the world energy. However, he had tried over 100 times and spent 3 days, but all of them ended in failure. Even if he had mastered the five elemental world power and had the experience of refining the world mountain, it was useless here. The world power of Planet Heaven Killer was clearly different in nature. If Great Emperor Tian Fun, Tian Shu, and Yin Shuiyan were here, they would have had a chance to refine it. But he just couldn't. He had to think of another way. After pondering for a long time, Ji Tianqing decided to use the method he used to refine the five elements world. It was a stupid method, but it was effective in all the heavens. Ji Tianqing forced out 3 drops of dark golden god blood and dripped them onto the purple world mountain. Those 3 drops of god blood were the blood of his heart. They contained 30% of his power and cultivation. When the divine blood dripped onto the purple mountain, it immediately melted into the mountain, causing the mountain to emit a brilliant purple light. Ji Tianqing's face turned pale, and his aura weakened a lot. However, a gratified smile appeared on his face as he began to refine the power of the world. This method was indeed effective. The 3 drops of god blood were used as a catalyst to build a bridge between him and the purple mountain. His divine consciousness was immersed in the world meridian, and he frantically absorbed the purple world power. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Thousands of strands of sacred purple light flew out of the purple mountain and entered his body. Ji Tianqing was immersed in his cultivation. He had no distractions and was fully focused. His mind saw the scenes of Planet Heaven Killer through the world meridian. The scenes of the continents, mountains, and rivers appeared in his mind, changing like illusions. He saw countless Heaven Killer craftsmen rebuilding their homes day and night. Many Heaven Killer warriors were still searching for survivors and treating the injured in the ruins and the sea. There were also fleets of Heaven Killer fleets flying across the sky, patrolling the continents. Thousands of images flooded Ji Tianqing's mind, allowing him to quickly understand the current situation of the Heaven Destroyer star. Time passed silently. 2 months passed quickly. Ji Tianqing had refined a huge amount of world power and could control 1/10 of Planet Heaven Killer. Half a year later, the world power he had refined had increased 3-fold, and he could control 3/10 of Planet Heaven Killer. After 8 months, the world power he had absorbed would be able to control 40% of Planet Heaven Killer. At this time, the power of the 3 drops of god blood had been completely exhausted. Ji Tianqing could no longer refine the world power, unless he sacrificed more than half of his god blood at the risk of his cultivation level dropping, like when he refined the 5-element world. Without a doubt, Ji Tianqing did not intend to do that. It would be a waste of time, and his cultivation level would drop, and his strength would drop. Moreover, his goal was not to control Planet Heaven Killer, but to destroy this planet. 40% of the world power is enough to move Planet Heaven Killer, Ji Tianqing muttered to himself. He decisively ended his cultivation and withdrew his power. The black hole plan can finally be carried out. His eyes were filled with anticipation as he waved his fist. Then, he circulated his energy and sent a sacred purple light into the world mountain. Through the world meridian in the purple mountain, he controlled 40% of Planet Heaven Killer and released a vast amount of world power. Swoosh! Suddenly, Planet Heaven Killer which was floating in the void, emitted 100,000 streaks of purple flames that illuminated 300 million miles of the void. The 100,000 streaks of purple flames formed by the world power were all concentrated in the southern hemisphere of planet Heaven Killer. A terrifying power erupted and immediately pushed the huge planet Heaven Killer to fly in the void. The motionless planet Heaven Killer suddenly started to fly. This caused the entire planet to tremble violently dozens of times. The planet only trembled slightly, but it was an earth-shattering earthquake and disaster for the Heaven Killers on the various continents. The 3 continents that had finally calmed down immediately cracked again. The continents broke apart, causing volcanoes and magma to erupt in countless areas. The tides in the endless sea rose violently, and huge waves covered the sky and earth, drowning countless continents and mountains. A calamity that was not too big but still shocking once again enveloped the Heaven Punisher race. As a result, more than 20 billion people on the 3 continents and 2 seas fell into chaos and disaster again. If a peerless expert stood in the void, he would be able to see a magical and brilliant scene. The southern half of planet Heaven Killer spewed out endless purple flames and pushed the entire planet toward the north. Only the gods in the 9 heavens could do such an earth-shattering thing. No one in the 3,000 mortal worlds had ever seen such a scene, although planet Heaven Killer was still very slow when it first started to fly. But as time passed, planet Heaven Killer's speed continued to increase, becoming faster and faster. Half a day later, planet Heaven Killer's speed was as fast as lightning, leaving behind a trail of purple flames in the void. The scene was spectacular. Chapter 27-28. The 3 continents and 2 seas of planet Heaven Trader were in chaos and panic. Fortunately, the catastrophes of the Earth, volcanic eruptions, and huge tides only lasted for half a day before they ended. Even so, more than 1 billion members of the Heaven Trader died, and more than 2 billion people were injured. Tens of thousands of the cities that were in perfect condition were destroyed. Cities that had just been built or were in the process of being built were turned into ruins again. This made the craftsmen of the Heaven Trader break down. The people were helpless and panicked. Everyone was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. They didn't know where to hide, nor did they know when the next disaster would come. Therefore, countless generals tried to contact the Emperor God Palace to report the news. However, the Emperor God Palace only issued an order for the hundreds of millions of soldiers to defend their territories and comfort the people as soon as possible. The order didn't mention anything about the cause of the disaster and the preventive measures, because Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin didn't know what was going on. When planet Heaven Trader was first pushed, there was a huge earthquake and tsunami. The Emperor God Palace naturally knew about this. Tian Shu was shocked. He immediately put on his armor and took the Neptune's halberd to seek revenge on Ji Tianxing. He subconsciously thought that Ji Tianxing had attacked planet Heaven Trader. However, Yin Shuiyin stopped him and told him solemnly that it wasn't Ji Tianxing. Planet Heaven Trader had run away. Tian Shu was dumbfounded when he heard this. Planet Heaven Trader ran away? Mother, what do you mean? Planet Heaven Trader was fine. Why would it run away? How could it run away? Yun Shuiyin said with an odd expression, I know that this matter is absurd to you, but it's absolutely true. I can't explain it in a few words. I'll take you to the void and you'll understand. Therefore, Yun Shuiyin took Tian Shu and drove the Black Dragon battleship to the void. Swoosh! A few hours later, the Black Dragon battleship flew into the vast void. Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin walked out of the battleship and stood on the wide deck, looking down at planet Heaven Trader. They could clearly see that the southern hemisphere of planet Heaven Trader was erupting with hundreds of thousands of purple flames. An unimaginably huge thrust was pushing the Heaven Destroyer star through the void at a speed faster than lightning. Tian Shu was dumbfounded on the spot. He was so shocked that his jaw dropped. Mother, what's going on? How could this be? Although Dubhe was known as the #1 genius in the starry skies, with extraordinary aptitude and perception. However, he had always lived on planet Heaven Crusher, and his status was too honorable. His life had been smooth since he was young, and he had never experienced any setbacks. Therefore, his experience and knowledge were limited. On top of that, the mysterious power of stars rushing through the void had never happened in the past 30,000 years. Who the hell knew what was going on? Even the Heaven Punisher was dumbfounded, let alone Tian Shu. Yun Shuiyin pointed at the 100,000 purple flames that soared into the sky and said with a heavy expression, "The gods of the mortal world naturally have no idea what sort of power this is or what's going on. But with Mother's experience and judgment, it should be the world energy of planet Heaven Killer." The power of the world? Tian Shu frowned and looked puzzled. "Mother, what kind of power is that? Why haven't I heard of it before? Is it stronger than divine power? Is it the power of the stars?" Yun Shuiyin shook her head gently and said, "The power of the world is the origin of every world. It's a type of divine power, but it's one of the top divine powers. The power of the stars is the power emitted by billions of stars, and it's not the power of the world. That's because the power of the stars cannot form a complete world." Tian Shu was enlightened as he nodded and said, "I see. Do you mean that the power of the world within planet Heaven Killer is propelling it through the void? But why would the power of the world erupt for no reason? Why would it propel planet Heaven Killer?" Yun Shuiyin said with a deep look in her eyes, "The power of the world has no consciousness, so of course it wouldn't erupt on its own, much less propel a star through the void. Someone is deliberately controlling the power of the world to propel planet Heaven Killer into the depths of the void." Tian Shu was even more shocked as he asked in disbelief, "Mother, didn't you say that the power of the world is the top divine power? Who has the ability to control it and propel planet Heaven Killer?" Yun Shuiyin was silent for a moment before she said leisurely, "Logically speaking, only a godly king can do it. But from the current situation, this matter definitely has something to do with Ji Tianxing." "What? That bastard again?" Tian Shu was enraged as his eyes shone with a ferocious light. "Mother, that's impossible. How could Ji Tianxing have such a heaven-defying method? First, he controlled the meteor to strike planet Heaven Killer, and now he's propelling planet Heaven Killer into the depths of the void. This is the divine power of a godly king from the upper realm." Thinking of this, Tian Shu's body suddenly stiffened as a terrifying thought flashed through his mind. A godly king from the upper realm. "Mother, do you think it's possible that the godly king has abandoned the Heaven Killer and wants to kill us? Other than them, who else would be able to do such a thing?" Yun Shuiyin glanced at him expressionlessly and said with certainty, "Tian Shu, don't talk nonsense. The godly king from the upper realm spent 1,000 years nurturing the Heaven Killer. Why would he turn against us? Moreover, the honorable godly king has already taken you in as his disciple." Hearing her words, Tian Shu finally calmed down. "That's right. The godly king has no reason to exterminate us. But I still can't believe that this is Ji Tianxing's doing." Yun Shuiyin said indifferently, "It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. Whether this is Ji Tianxing's doing or not, we'll talk about it later. What we need to consider now is where planet Heaven Killer is flying to. How does the other party control the power of the cosmos? What conspiracy is driving planet Heaven Killer to fly? How should we stop it?" As she spoke, Yun Shuiyin looked ahead with a sharp gaze, observing the boundless void. Tian Shu fell silent for a moment. He could not answer any of the questions, nor did he have a clue. All he could do was remain silent and not disturb Yun Shuiyin's thoughts. After a long while, Yun Shuiyin observed the boundless void in front of her and did not find any problems. She pondered for a long time before muttering in a low voice, "The source of the power of the world should be within the Earth's core. It's said that it's in the core of the world. Unfortunately, only experts who have reached the godly king realm can go deep into the Earth's core and enter the core of the world." Tian Shu continued, "In that case, we can't cut off the power of the world, nor can we stop planet Heaven Killer from flying?" Yun Shuiyin nodded. Tian Shu pointed at the void in front of planet Heaven Killer and said, "Then all we can do is wait and observe to see if planet Heaven Killer will encounter any danger." "Danger?" Yun Shuiyin, who was deep in thought, had a flash of inspiration when he reminded her. She immediately thought of something. Her expression changed on the spot as a terrifying cold light flashed in her eyes. Chapter 27-29. Seeing the sudden change in Yun Shuiyin's expression, Tianshu frowned. He hurriedly asked, "Imperial Mother, have you thought of something?" Yun Xian nodded slightly and said in a serious tone, "After your reminder, I seem to have guessed the other party's conspiracy." "What conspiracy?" Tianshu asked instinctively. Yun Shuiyin explained patiently. "The most common dangers in the void are meteorite belts, void storms, void fires, folded spaces, and black holes. If the Heaven's Fault planet is traveling in the void and encounters a large-scale void storm, void fire, or a folded space, it will suffer heavy losses. If it collides with a meteorite belt or other stars, the Heaven's Fault planet is likely to be torn apart. The consequences will be even worse than when the meteorite collided with it." At this point, Yun Shuiyin paused for a moment before continuing slowly. If the Heaven's Fault planet were to collide with the most mysterious and terrifying black hole, it would be beyond redemption. Even a godly king powerhouse would die if they were swallowed by a black hole, let alone a star. Even if the Heaven's Fault planet was not swallowed by a black hole, it would still gravitate towards the gravitational pull. Once it enters the gravitational field of the black hole, it will be torn to pieces and disintegrate. Tianshu's eyes widened, and he shouted with grief and indignation, "Damn it! That little bastard is so vicious, so despicable." He was so angry that his chest rose and fell rapidly, and his eyes turned blood red. At this point, he was no longer concerned about whether the meteorite and the power of the world were driven by Ji Tianxing. Unknowingly, he had accepted and acquiesced in this matter. Yun Shuiyin stared in front of the Heaven's Fault planet and said solemnly, "Tianshu, the only thing we can do now is to keep an eye on the void in front of us and be vigilant of the dangers." Tianshu hesitated and asked, "Mother, if you're right and the Heaven's Fault planet is going to collide with a star or enter a black hole, then what should we do? Sit and wait for death?" Yun Shuiyin shook her head decisively and said, "Of course not. Even if we can't stop it, there are still the gods from the upper realm." Tianshu's face was filled with worry. He smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, even if we sacrifice 300,000 people to contact the upper realm deities, they won't be able to help us. No matter what, they couldn't descend to Heaven Trader Star. At most, they could only scatter a little bit of divine light. But it's useless. It can't save planet Heaven." Yun Shuiyin said coldly, "So what? All we can do is to do our best and leave the rest to fate. If 300,000 isn't enough, then sacrifice 3 million or even 30 million. Tianshu was speechless. Even though he felt that his mother's actions were very extreme and that she did not care about the lives of the Heaven Punishers at all. But now that things had come to this, the entire Heaven Punishing planet was in danger. If they weren't careful, more than 20 billion people would die. Under these circumstances, his mother had no other choice. The Heaven FA star was still speeding through the void at an increasingly fast speed. Inside the world core, Ji Tianxing was still channeling the world energy within the Purple Mountain, although he could only use 40% of the Heaven Punishing Star's power. This was enough for the Heaven Punishing Star to fly through the void like a ball of dazzling purple light with a long purple tail flame. Unfortunately, Tianshu and Yun Shuiyin were in the void and not on the Heaven Punishing Star. Otherwise, Ji Tianxing would have a whole new level of respect for Yun Shuiyin if he heard the conversation between the mother and son. This was because Yun Shuiyin had guessed correctly. It was just as she had guessed. Ji Tianxing's black hole plan was to push the Heaven Punishing Star into a black hole and destroy the entire planet. Before arriving at the Heaven Punishing Star, Ji Tianxing had been planning for this. About 1 billion miles north of the Heaven Punishing Star, there was an empty region. In that void, Ji Tianxing found a huge, mysterious black hole. A few hundred years ago, there were a few planets in that void. Of course, they were all lifeless and barren planets. Ever since the mysterious black hole appeared, it had been moving slowly in the void. In the past few hundred years, a few barren planets have been swallowed by the black hole. Now, Ji Tianxing wanted to send the heaven-punishing star over as well. As time passed, the distance between the heaven-punishing star and the black hole grew closer and closer. In just 5 days, the distance between the two had shrunk by half. It was only 500 million miles away. The heaven-punishing star was heading towards destruction. However, Tianshu and Yun Shuiyan had yet to discover the existence of the black hole. The black hole was huge, with a radius of 100 million miles. The gravitational circle around the black hole had also reached a radius of 200 million miles. However, the black hole was as black as ink, and the gravitational circle was invisible. With Tianshu and Yin Shuiyan's eyesight, it was impossible for them to discover it from 500 million miles away. Just like in the past, Ji Tianxing and the others would only discover the black hole when they were 300 million miles away. Peace gradually returned to the heaven-punishing star. The more than 20 billion citizens of the heaven-punishing star thought that the disaster was over. They had no idea that they were about to face an even more terrifying disaster. The Black Dragon warship was still speeding through the void. It could only keep up with the heaven-punishing star's speed when it was at full power. Yin Shuiyan stood alone at the bow of the warship. She stood proudly on the dragon's head and stared coldly at the void in front of her. 5 days had passed. She had been standing there without moving half a step. Tianshu stood with her for 3 days before losing patience and returning to the warship to deal with government affairs. The past 5 days had been peaceful, and the heaven-punishing star had not encountered any setbacks. However, Yin Shuiyan did not let down her guard at all. Instead, the uneasiness in her heart grew stronger. She had a strong premonition that after the temporary calm, there would be a shocking storm. Therefore, she had Tianshu order the head ritual master to prepare everything. Now, the head ritual master was on standby, with 300 priests on the altar of the Imperial God Palace. The 300,000 citizens of the heaven-punishing star were also sealed around the altar as sacrifices. They could be used at any time. In addition, there were 1 million citizens of the heaven-punishing star as backup sacrifices. They stayed in the Imperial God Palace. In addition to preparing for the grand sacrificial ceremony, Yin Shuiyan also thought of a way out. If the grand sacrificial ceremony failed, even the gods would not be able to save the heaven-punishing star. Then, she would decisively give up on the heaven-punishing star and take Tianshu with her to activate the laws of heaven and earth and ascend to the upper realm. As long as she and Tianshu survived, there would be a chance for revenge in the future. As for the life and death of the heaven punishers, she could not care less. After all, she was not a member of the heaven punishers. After a long wait and suffering, another 2 days passed. The heaven-punishing star advanced another 200 million miles. At this time, the heaven-punishing star was only 300 million miles away from the mysterious black hole. Yin Shuiyan, who was standing at the bow of the warship and observing the void, finally realized that something was wrong. She saw a blurry black shadow in the boundless void in front of her. It looked like a huge vortex. The void was cold and gloomy, but it was not completely dark. There was some starlight. However, the surroundings of the vortex were as black as ink. It was as if all the starlight had been swallowed by the vortex. Seeing this, Yin Shuiyan's delicate body trembled. Her eyes emitted a cold light. It's 5 chapters again. Brothers, please cast your votes. End of chapter. Chapter 2730. A black hole. Yin Shuiyan reacted in an instant and shouted in a cold tone. I was right, it's a black hole. That damn Ji Tianxing. How could he be so vicious? Yin Shuiyan's expression changed. She quickly sent a voice transmission to Tianshu and ordered, Tianshu, a black hole has appeared 300 million miles ahead. Send an order to the Archbishop immediately. Tell her to initiate the sacrificial ceremony and contact the upper realms deities. Tianshu was busy dealing with government affairs in the battleship. His body stiffened when he heard Yin Shuiyan's voice. His expression became extremely solemn. Swoosh! In a flash of white light, he teleported to Yin Shuiyan's side and looked ahead with a burning gaze. Soon, he saw the blurry shadow of the vortex in the void ahead. He took out his communication jade slip without hesitation and sent an order to the archbishop. Then he asked solemnly, "Mother, in your opinion, how big is the black hole? Will planet Fa be completely swallowed by the black hole?" Yun Shuiyin said coldly, "According to my estimation, the black hole should be 100 million miles wide. According to convention, the 200 million miles around the black hole is a gravitational circle. Once planet Fa enters the gravitational circle, the divine light barrier and heaven and earth spiritual chi will be swallowed. Without the protection of the divine light and heaven and earth spiritual chi, planet Fa will be torn apart. The entire planet will collapse and disintegrate into endless fragments, then be swallowed by the black hole. Now, we're only 100 million miles away from the gravitational circle. We'll enter it in a day." "What? We're already so close." Tian Shu was shocked. He asked anxiously, "If the upper realms deities can't save planet Fa, what should we do?" Yin Shuiyin said calmly, "You don't have to worry. I'm prepared. If planet Fa is destined to be swallowed by the black hole, we'll escape before it enters the gravitational circle. I'll bring you to heaven." "No." Tian Shu shook his head and refused. He said unwillingly, "We can escape, but what about the 20 billion people who want to kill planet Fa? What about the tens of millions of soldiers and fleets? In the mortal world, we're the overlords of the major star regions, the noblest powerhouses. Once you ascend to the upper realm, you'll be a lowly deity with no power or influence." Yin Shuiyin looked at him with a stern expression. She seemed to have expected better from him. She reprimanded him. "What's there to miss about the riches and glory of the mortal world? With Mother's experience and methods, as well as your talent and aptitude, we can still become the overlords of a region when we ascend to the upper realm and rule over thousands of deities." Sky Pivot fell silent, struggling and hesitating. Yin Shuiyin added, "If you really can't bear to see billions of citizens die and tens of millions of soldiers reduced to ashes, then give the order now." He ordered all citizens who were above the martial sage realm to gather at the imperial cities of the various countries as soon as possible. Then, they would board the battleships and leave Heaven Trader Star in batches. Have them form a fleet and rush to Celestial Globe and Muchu Star. Tian Shu was startled, and he asked, "Only people above the martial sage realm can leave Heaven Punisher Star? What about the other 20 billion people? Are they going to be buried with the Heaven Fa Star?" Yun Shuiyin said expressionlessly, "Only the strong have the value of survival. The weak have no right to live." Tian Shu's face froze. He frowned and said, "But there's only one day left. It's too rushed. Let them live as long as they can." Yin Shuiyin said indifferently, "Those who can't escape in time will die." Tian Shu smiled bitterly and asked, "Mother, since you already had this idea, why didn't you give the order a few days in advance? Are you blaming me for not caring about the lives of the citizens?" Yin Shuiyin frowned and said angrily, "Before today, we couldn't be sure if Heaven Trader Star would hit the black hole. Moreover, all the soldiers above the martial sage realm have to stay in Heaven Trader Star to guard the homes of the citizens and prevent Ji Tianxing and the others from attacking." Tian Shu quickly bowed and apologized. "Mother, please calm down. I won't blame you. I will give the order now and follow your orders." After Tian Shu bowed, he immediately returned to the battleship and gave the order. It took 2 hours for his order to be transmitted to the 3 continents and then to the various holy kingdoms. It would take another 4 to 6 hours to travel from the various holy kingdoms to the various cities. It would take at least a day for all the martial sages to gather in the imperial city and leave Heaven Trader Star on the battleship. It would take another 4 to 6 hours for the fleet to leave Heaven Trader Star. Therefore, most of the soldiers and citizens of Heaven Trader Realm could not leave Heaven Trader Star in 2 days. If no one stopped Heaven Trader Star from hitting the black hole, almost 99% of the citizens would be killed. Heaven Trader Star, Emperor God Palace. In the middle of a square that was 300 miles wide, there was an altar that was 100 miles wide. This was the most sacred altar of the Heaven Trader tribe, and it was only used once every 50 years. The altar was 100 miles wide and 1,000 feet tall. It was made of purple blood divine jade, and there were more than 30 million precious divine stones in it. At that moment, the grand sacrificial ceremony had begun. The entire altar shone with purple light, and it lit up the sea of clouds. The grand priest, who was dressed in a luxurious purple robe, stood in the middle of the altar. He held a staff that was as tall as a man and knelt on the ground to pray. He looked very pious. Around the altar, 300 priests in white robes were holding staffs and compasses. They were arranged in a special formation as they knelt on the ground and chanted. The sound of everyone chanting together was deep, solemn, and dignified. It reverberated in the sky. The square below the altar was filled with citizens of Heaven Trader Star. There were 300,000 people in the square, and it was so crowded that not even a drop of water could trickle through. However, everyone was in a formation, and it did not reduce the chaos at all. The citizens of Heaven Trader Star were all weak martial artists. However, they were strong and they were full of blood chi. They were very pious in their faith. Even though they knew that they were sacrifices, none of them retreated or ran away. Instead, everyone's faces were filled with pride and anticipation. Their eyes were burning with passion. It was their honor to be able to sacrifice themselves for the Heaven Trader Star to the supreme being king. About 4 hours later, the head ritual master and the 300 priests finally activated the grand array of the sacrificial altar. The altar shone with an even more dazzling purple light. It released a vast and powerful divine aura that shook the heavens and earth. Seeing this, the head ritual master revealed a look of relief and quietly wiped away the sweat on her forehead. He knelt on the ground and chanted a long and cryptic incantation. Then he waved the staff in his hand and shouted, "Let the sacrifice begin." As his voice fell, the 300 priests used all their strength to activate the altar's power. The 300,000 Heaven Trader Star martial artists below the altar were filled with anticipation. The group of martial artists at the front knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times and 9 times in a pious and respectful manner. Then they crawled on the ground and climbed onto the altar. Chapter 27:31. Swoosh! When the tens of thousands of devout martial artists climbed up the altar immediately emitted a blinding purple light. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of martial artists were enveloped by the sacred purple light. The purple light was like a blazing divine fire, quickly devouring the bodies of the martial artists. In just a few breaths, the tens of thousands of martial artists melted in the purple light, leaving only piles of black ashes. These martial artists had sacrificed their flesh and souls, disappearing forever. The purple light at the top of the altar had also gained 2 shades of dark red, becoming more turbulent. Then, the second batch of offerings knelt on the ground. Again, the tens of thousands of martial artists kowtowed to the sky and crawled up the altar. Swoosh! Another purple light lit up like a raging fire, devouring many martial artists. Then, the third, fourth, and fifth batches of offerings climbed up the altar one after another. With the sacrifice of tens of thousands of martial artists, the altar's brilliance became more dazzling, and its aura became more powerful, sweeping across tens of thousands of miles. The purple light that shot up to the sky became more turbulent, as if it was connected to the 9 heavens. Unknowingly, another 2 hours had passed. The 300,000 martial artists were divided into 30 batches, and all of them had been sacrificed. The purple light and aura of the altar had reached an unprecedented peak. The entire Imperial God Palace and even the sea of clouds within 30,000 miles were enveloped by the purple light. However, there was nothing unusual in the sky. The Archbishop and the 300 priests did not dare to slack off. They continued to chant and cast spells with all their might. For hours had passed, and there was still no response from the upper realms deities. The Archbishop was a little anxious and worried, and his forehead was sweating profusely. At this moment, Tian Shu sent a communication jade slip to ask about the situation of the grand sacrificial ceremony. The archbishop reported the situation as it was, feeling uneasy. Not long after, Tian Shu's communication jade slip flew back and gave an order. The deities of the upper realm are not responding. There must be not enough offerings. Continue to smelt offerings until the deities respond. The head ritual master obeyed and hurriedly sent people to gather more offerings. Fortunately, he followed Tian Shu's order and prepared 1,000,000 martial artists in advance, waiting for orders in the Imperial God Palace. Not long after, a large number of Imperial God Palace protectors brought 300,000 offerings to the square. The previous scene quickly repeated itself. The 300,000 martial artists were divided into 30 batches, and they climbed up the altar one after another, disintegrating in the sacred purple light. The altar absorbed a large amount of chi, blood, and souls, and its power reached an unprecedented peak. The purple light was even more dazzling, and the altar's aura was so majestic that everyone was suffocating. The altar's aura. Finally, some strange phenomena appeared in the dazzling purple sky. Dazzling lightning and golden light flickered in the sky, as if they were about to break the barrier between the mortal and divine realms. Seeing this scene, the archbishop and of the gods of the Imperial God Palace, the deities, "Hurry, Almighty God, you have sensed our sincerity. Don't continue to add of offerings of offerings." The head officiant waved her scepter and shouted at the top of her lungs. Thus, the Imperial of the God Heaven, of them, inside the world core of planet Tianfeng. Ji Tianxing ended the 7 days of spell casting and slowly withdrew his palms. He looked a little tired, and beads of sweat could be seen on his forehead. Obviously, he had spent a lot of energy controlling the power of the world and pushing planet Heaven to the black hole. Phew! Finally, it's done. Planet Heaven is only 150 million miles away from the black hole. It will enter the black hole in 1.5 days and be completely destroyed. After flying another 50 million miles, it will enter the black hole's gravitational circle in a few hours. Once it enters the gravitational circle, even a divine emperor can't change the outcome. Ji Tianxing smiled with relief. Planet Heaven was only 50 million miles away from the gravitational circle. With the terrifying inertia, it would rush into the gravitational circle and then be torn to pieces by the black hole. Ji Tianxing's mission was completed, and he decided to leave Planet Heaven. However, before he left Planet Heaven FA, he wanted to take a look at the situation there. He wanted to know how the Imperial God Palace would react. What were Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin feeling right now? Thus, Ji Tianxing's consciousness entered the Purple Mountain and observed Planet Heaven through the veins of the world. Unfortunately, the Imperial God Palace was located at the top of the vast sea of clouds. The veins of the world that he had refined could not detect that area. Naturally, he could not see the Imperial God Palace either. Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed. He then observed other areas of Planet Heaven through the veins of the world. After a while, he suddenly found something strange. On one of the continents, countless experts of the heaven-seeking sect were frantically rushing in a certain direction. Martial sages flew in the sky or rode on demonic beasts. Most of the experts of the martial god realm rode on warships. Everyone's goal was the same, which was the imperial city of each holy kingdom. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing was a little surprised and thought to himself, what are those experts of the Heavens tribe doing? They are all as anxious as if they were reincarnated. Could it be that Yun Shuiyin and Tian Shu found the black hole and gathered all the experts of the Heavens tribe to fight against it? But it's useless. Even if they gather 100,000 martial gods, they won't be able to stop Planet Heaven. With doubts in his heart, Ji Tianxing shifted his gaze to the imperial city of one of the holy kingdoms. He immediately saw a large number of warships floating in the sky above the imperial city. There were at least a few thousand of them. Batch after batch of martial sages rushed into the battleship, fighting to be the first. In a short while, Thousands of warships were filled with people and formed a huge fleet that rose into the sky. Ji Tianxing's gaze followed the fleet as it crossed the boundless sky and finally broke through the thin holy light barrier and entered the empty space. They have entered the empty space. Do they really want to stop planet Heaven? Ji Tianxing thought to himself and felt that there was something wrong. It didn't take long for him to discover something even more interesting. After the fleet entered the empty space, they did not have any intention of stopping planet Heaven. The fleet plunged into the empty space and fled in the opposite direction. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing suddenly understood. I see. I thought they were going to make a last-ditch struggle. I didn't expect them to abandon their planet and escape. Ji Tianxing sneered and immediately controlled the power of the Heavens tribe to attack the fleet. The fleet had just left planet Heaven and had flown tens of thousands of miles away. The more than 100,000 experts in the warships looked as if they had just survived a disaster and felt lucky. Many people were discussing why planet Heaven was flying in the empty space. Why would Fa Tianxing come here? At this moment, 10 huge purple pillars of light shot out from planet Heaven Trader and blasted towards the fleet. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, 10 purple light pillars that were thousands of miles long drowned the entire fleet and created earth-shattering explosions. Chapter 2732. The 10 purple light pillars were formed by the power of the realm. The so-called power of the world could create a world, but could also destroy a world. How terrifying was its power? The thousands of battleships were just ordinary battleships. Most of the people in the battleships were martial sages, and only a few were martial gods. How could they withstand the attack of the power of the realm? In the blink of an eye, the thousands of battleships were turned into pieces and disintegrated. As for the hundreds of thousands of heaven punishers, they had naturally been reduced to ashes without leaving behind any corpses. However, they had died in vain and did not know who had killed them. Ji Tianxing used the power of the Heaven Destroyer Star to destroy the entire fleet with one move. He was in a good mood. At that moment, he suddenly realized that there was another fleet in the void not far away. The fleet was slightly smaller, and there were only about 600 battleships. It was obvious that they had just escaped from a country's imperial city and were preparing to head to their new home. Ji Tianxing did not hesitate and used the power of the realm again to release 9 purple light pillars. Boom, boom, boom. 9 pillars of light, thousands of kilometers long, instantly annihilated the entire fleet, leaving not a single piece of armor behind. Next, Ji Tianxing used the power of the realm to observe the void around the Heaven Destroyer Star. Within 2 hours, he discovered more than a dozen fleets. Every fleet had a mighty aura, with the largest having over 1,000 battleships and the smallest having over 500 to 600. Many of the battleships carried the Heaven Destroyer Star into the void and escaped from the Heaven Destroyer Star as quickly as possible. However, those fleets were doomed to tragedy when they were discovered by Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing attacked more than a dozen times and used the power of the realm to destroy the fleets. The Black Dragon battleship followed the Heaven Destroyer Star. Yun Shuiyan, who was standing at the bow of the battleship, saw many fleets being destroyed by the purple light. With her intelligence, she knew what was going on at a glance. She was instantly enraged, and her eyes were filled with killing intent. Damn bastard. It must be Ji Tianxing. It must be him. He can really control the power of the realm and destroy the fleets that escaped into the void. Damn it. Damn it. Yin Shuiyan was so angry that her face turned ashen. Her entire body was burning with rage. Unfortunately, she didn't know where Ji Tianxing was hiding. She wanted to find Ji Tianxing for revenge, but she didn't know where to start. He was furious, but there was nothing he could do. The only thing she could think of was to urge Dubhe to ask about the situation of the heaven-worshipping ceremony. Dubhe, in another 20 million miles, planet Fa would enter the gravitational sphere. How's the progress of the grand sacrificial ceremony? Yin Shuiyan stood at the ship's bow and sent a voice transmission to Sky Pivot. Tian Shu had been giving out orders and receiving reports from the various divine nations. He was so busy that his head was in a mess. When he heard Yun Shuiyan's question, his body stiffened as he grew increasingly anxious. "Mother, just now, the Archbishop sent a message saying that the gods of the upper realm have already reacted. It's just that the sky is still filled with lightning and divine light. The deities of the upper realm have yet to issue their oracle." Yin Shuiyan frowned and ordered in a deep voice, "Hurry him up again. We don't have enough time to melt all the offerings." Tian Shu acknowledged the order and hurriedly took out the communication jade slip and gave the order to the Archbishop. Inside the Imperial God Palace, the altar had devoured 900,000 warriors, and its power had already reached its peak. The purple light that shot into the sky turned everything within 50,000 miles into a world of purple light. The majestic aura suppressed the Archbishop and the 300 priests to the ground. They could not stand up at all. Such terrifying momentum and power was something that no one had ever experienced before. The Archbishop was even worried that the power of the sacrifice would be too terrifying and cause the altar to explode. However, he also understood that Planet FA had reached a point of life and death. Even if the altar were to explode, even if hundreds or tens of millions of people were to be sacrificed, he had to contact the gods of the upper realm. At this moment, a jade slip flew through the air. The Archbishop hurriedly reached out and caught it. His consciousness entered it and read Tian Shu's order. A moment later, he put away the communication jade slip and shouted, "Quick, bring the last 400,000 sacrifices here." His order was passed down. Not long after, a large number of Imperial God Palace protectors brought the 400,000 warriors to the spacious square. The square was so crowded that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The scene was a little chaotic. However, the Archbishop could not care less. He hurriedly ordered the sacrifices to start the sacrifice. 10,000 warriors in a batch began to kowtow and worship. They crawled onto the altar and turned into ashes in the purple light. As time passed, batch after batch of warriors completed the sacrifice. The purple light and power of the altar were still slowly rising, approaching the critical point. The 300 priests who presided over the sacrificial ceremony gradually could not bear the terrifying pressure. Everyone's face was pale, and purple blood flowed out of their bodies. They also began to feel dizzy. When the 400,000 sacrifices were reduced by half, the power of the altar reached the critical point. Crack, crack, crack. Suddenly, more than 10 cracks appeared on the altar that was thousands of feet tall and spread out in all directions. Bam, bam, bam. A few of the white-robed priests who presided over the sacrifice also exploded on the spot, turning into a mist of blood that sprinkled on the altar. The Archbishop in the middle of the altar was also suppressed to the ground. The scepter in his hand began to crack. Cracks appeared all over his body, and purple blood spurted out. His bones also began to shatter. However, no one retreated or hesitated. They continued to preside over the sacrifice. As long as they could communicate with the upper realm deities, it would be worth it even if they all sacrificed themselves. Cracks began to appear on the surface of the altar. The entire altar began to shake violently, and countless pieces of rubble crumbled. At this moment, the thunder and divine light in the sky suddenly exploded with a loud noise that shook the universe. Kaboom! Along with that enormous bang that seemed to split the heavens and earth apart, an incomparably enormous gap split open in the boundless sky. It was a blazing white gap that was tens of thousands of miles long. Endless lightning and divine golden light supported the gap, preventing it from closing. Without a doubt, the space barrier that separated the mortal world and the heavenly realm was broken by the upper realm deities. Under the power of the heavenly axiom, the gap would naturally close. However, the upper realm deities used some unknown method to support the gap. Roar! Roar! The voice of a deity that seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens came from the gap in the sky and scattered between heaven and earth. Suddenly, the Archbishop, more than 200 white-robed priests, and hundreds of thousands of martial artists who had not sacrificed were all ecstatic. Everyone prostrated themselves on the ground respectfully, resisting the terrifying pressure, and kowtowed respectfully and devoutly. In the gap that was tens of thousands of miles long, among the golden thunder and divine light, a huge eyeball appeared out of thin air. It was a round red eyeball with a radius of 3,000 miles. There was a dark golden eyeball that was emotionless as it looked down coldly at heaven and earth. Chapter 2733. Such a scene shocked the head ritual master. The 200 white-robed priests were also horrified. Their hearts were filled with fear. They had served the Heaven Crusaders for thousands of years and had hosted more than 10 grand sacrificial ceremonies. However, they had never seen such a scene. In the past grand sacrificial ceremonies, the upper realm deities could only send down endless divine light and an oracle occasionally. But now, an eyeball had appeared in the gap between the two realms. Just what kind of powerful existence was it to actually have such a huge eyeball as big as a mountain? That cold and indifferent gaze contained a supreme, world-destroying might and power. Under the gaze of the eyeball, the entire imperial god palace was shrouded in endless divine power. The hundreds of thousands of sacrificial offerings in the square were too weak, and they exploded one after another, turning into a bloody mist that filled the sky. Even the bodies of more than 200 white-robed oracles started to crack, and the ground was covered in blood. In just 2 breaths, hundreds of white-robed priests could not withstand the terrifying divine power. Their divine bodies collapsed and turned into flesh and blood. Fortunately, the incomparably huge, cold, and indifferent eyeball finally disappeared. The divine lightning and golden light in the sky also disappeared. The 10,000-mile-long gap quickly healed and returned to normal. The peerlessly terrifying divine might disappeared. The purple light that shot up to the sky from the altar gradually dissipated, and so did the mighty power. Rumble. Following a series of loud and muffled noises, the entire altar shattered into pieces, collapsing into ruins all over the ground. The archbishop and the 100 white-robed priests quickly escaped from the ruins. They stood in the blood-soaked square and looked up at the sky in shock. It's over? The altar has collapsed. The grand sacrificial ceremony has been interrupted, and we have lost contact with the upper realm deities. Did we fail in the end? Everyone was filled with bewilderment, and they revealed expressions of deep despair and disappointment. Many white-robed priests could not take the blow. They knelt on the ground and cried in despair. The archbishop also looked at the sky in despair. His eyes were as red as blood, and 2 streams of blood flowed down from the corners of his eyes. Are we mortals so lowly that even the upper realm deities don't want to help us? The entire planet Heaven Crusher had more than 20 billion living beings. God, we have worshipped you so sincerely for 1,000 years. Why are you so cold and heartless? Seeing the head ritual master's reaction, the more than 100 white-robed oracles became even sadder and more desperate. For a time, the huge square was filled with wailing sounds. Everyone was wailing as if they had lost their parents. The commotion in the square alerted the entire Emperor God Palace. Not long after, the soldiers and guards in the Emperor God Palace found out about the failure of the sacrificial ceremony. The entire Imperial God Palace was shrouded in gloomy clouds. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and guards were in despair. In everyone's eyes, they had been abandoned by the gods, and the entire planet Heaven Crusher would be destroyed. The Heaven Punishers in the Imperial God Palace could not see what was happening in the void. They were completely unaware that a completely different scene was taking place in the void outside Planet Heaven Trader. Planet Heaven Destroyer was about to enter the gravitational field of the black hole, dragging a long purple tail of flame behind it. The distance between them had already shrunk to a few million miles. After an hour, Planet Heaven Destroyer would enter the gravitational field. Then, the terrifying gravitational force would devour Planet Heaven Destroyer's divine light barrier and heaven and earth spiritual chi. Then, Planet Heaven Destroyer would be torn into pieces by the terrifying gravitational force. At this moment, Ji Tianxing also stopped casting. He manipulated the power of the world and left the depths of the Earth's core. In the next moment, a light flashed, and he appeared on the surface of Planet Heaven Destroyer. Then, he left Planet Heaven Destroyer at his fastest speed and returned to the void. Swoosh! He stood in the void 1,000,000 miles away from Planet Heaven Destroyer and watched as Planet Heaven Destroyer flew under his feet and headed straight for the black hole. It's time to end everything, Ji Tianxing murmured to himself. His tone was filled with relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. As long as Planet Heaven Destroyer was devoured by the black hole, the Heaven Punishers would be finished. Even if there were still tens of millions of Heaven Punishers left in the major star zones, it would be difficult for them to become powerful. They would soon be surrounded and annihilated by the various races. The pain and disaster that the Heaven Punishers had brought to the universe would end with the destruction of Planet Heaven Destroyer. Ji Tianxing was already planning in his heart. After Planet Heaven Destroyer was destroyed, he would bring his wife and children to the God Realm, tens of millions of miles away, in another void. The Black Dragon battleship had stopped flying and was floating in the void. Yun Shuiyin and Tian Shu stood at the bow of the battleship. They looked at this scene with complicated expressions and remained silent. Things had already come to this, and a miracle had not happened. Tian Shu had also sent a message to the Archbishop, but the answer he received was that they had failed. Planet Heaven Destroyer was about to be destroyed. It was a foregone conclusion. The mother and son were filled with grief, and their expressions were solemn. However, they could only watch as Planet Heaven Destroyer was about to be destroyed. There was nothing they could do. After a long time, Yin Shuiyin said in a low voice, Tian Shu, there's no need to watch anymore. Things have already come to this. Even a divine emperor can't save them. Planet Heaven Destroyer is about to be destroyed. This is fate. We should leave to avoid being hurt by the aftermath. Mother will take you to other stars to recuperate and prepare for 10 years. Then, I will bring you to the God Realm. Tian Shu looked at Planet Heaven Destroyer indifferently. His voice was cold and emotionless. He said in a low voice, I will remember this for the rest of my life. With Ji Tianxing's strength, he will soon be able to ascend to the God Realm. I, Tian Shu, swear that even if I ascend to the God Realm, I will use all means and all my strength to take revenge. Yun Shuiyin nodded slightly and said earnestly, a man should be brave after being humiliated. After this disaster, if you can pull yourself together and work hard, your future achievements will be limitless. All right, let's go. After saying that, Yun Shuiyin turned to leave. Tian Shu was stunned for a moment. He took one last look at Planet Heaven Destroyer and turned to enter the battleship. However, it was that last look that made his body stiffen, and he stopped abruptly. He could vaguely see that right above Planet Heaven Destroyer, thousands of miles away from the gravitational circle, a sacred golden light appeared in the void. Swoosh! Kaboom! Along with the appearance of the dazzling divine light, thousands of dark golden thunderbolts danced recklessly like wild dragons. Even though he was 30 million miles away, Tian Shu could sense that the dazzling golden light and thunderbolts contained supreme divine power. The golden light that covered the sky and the thousands of thunderbolts flashed and danced in the void, as if they were about to tear a hole in the void. Seeing this scene, Tian Shu was stunned for a moment. Then, his eyes widened, and he revealed a look of pleasant surprise. Mother, quick, look! The gods of the God Realm, are finally reacting. They didn't abandon us. They didn't abandon the Heaven Destroyer clan. Tian Shu shouted in ecstasy. His eyes were full of hope. Chapter 2734. Yun Shuiyin had just turned around and walked a few steps when she heard Tian Shu shout. She instinctively turned around and followed Tian Shu's gaze. She saw that there was indeed divine light and lightning flashing in the void. She was no stranger to this scene. It was the sign of communication between the gods and the Heaven Punishers during the grand sacrificial ceremony. We finally made contact. Yun Shuiyin pursed her lips and smiled, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. When Tian Shu saw her smile, he said excitedly, Mother, I've finally seen you smile." Ever since he was born, Yin Shuiyin had spent most of her time in isolation. The number of times they had met could be counted on one hand. In Tian Shu's memory, he had never seen Yin Shuiyin smile before. Soon after, a series of loud rumbling sounds reverberated from the void. The dazzling golden light and divine lightning were tearing apart the barrier between the two worlds in an extremely violent manner. Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu stood on the battleship and watched with anticipation. However, it took some time for the divine light to break through the void. Even the godly kings from the upper realm could not easily connect the two worlds. Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu were anxious. They prayed in their hearts, hoping that the gods would open up the passage between the two worlds as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Planet Heaven Punisher did not slow down and finally rushed into the black hole's gravitational circle. The terrifying gravitational force immediately swallowed the endless purple light and spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Yin Shuiyin, Tian Shu, and Ji Tianxing could clearly see that the thin purple light that enveloped half of Planet Heaven Punisher was flowing into the gravitational circle like water. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth on Planet Heaven Punisher was also plundered by the gravitational circle. It turned into millions of colorful light ribbons and flew into the gravitational circle. Moreover, the terrifying gravitational force pulled Planet Heaven Punisher, causing it to fly even faster. After a short quarter of an hour, 1% of Planet Heaven Punisher had completely entered the gravitational circle. The purple light barrier and spiritual energy of heaven and earth disappeared in that area, turning it into a vacuum. Then, the endless forests, grasslands, and endless mountain ranges quickly disintegrated into debris and were swallowed by the gravitational circle. There was also an endless flood from the surging seas and rivers. The sky was collapsing, the earth was collapsing, and the mountains and rivers were collapsing rapidly, turning into dust. When the earth that was tens of thousands of miles deep collapsed, the magma hidden in the depths of the earth was like a red flood that left Planet Heaven Punisher and flew into the gravitational circle. The Heaven Punishers living in that area left Planet Heaven Punisher uncontrollably and flew into the gravitational circle. Of course, only a minority of those who flew into the gravitational circle in perfect condition. 99% of the Heaven Punishers had been torn to shreds by the terrifying gravity when they left Planet Heaven Punisher. A terrifying disaster had arrived. Moreover, the disaster was spreading the disaster. Mountains, one after another, cities, and tribes one, and one after another. A kingdom was destroyed, a kingdom was destroyed A's. And in Tian Shu and Tian had a in a way. Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu were burning with impatience, their eyes bulging with anger. The two of them glanced at Planet Heaven FA, which was being swallowed by the gravitational sphere, and then raised their heads to look at the divine light and lightning in the void. They felt even more anxious. "Hurry up. Almighty God, I beg you to hurry up." The two of them could do nothing but pray devoutly. On the other side, Ji Tianxing stood in the void and watched all of this without any expression. He was calm. He was just waiting for the result. Originally, Planet Heaven Punisher flew to the edge of the gravitational circle due to inertia and slowed down by 30%. Now that it's being pulled by the gravitational force, Planet Heaven Punisher's speed is increasing and has recovered to its original speed. The more it enters the gravitational circle, the faster it will go. Based on the current situation, the entire Planet Heaven Punisher will be swallowed in 10 to 12 hours at most. Ji Tianxing's plan would be completed in a few more hours. However, at that moment, he suddenly caught a glimpse of dazzling golden light and lightning flashing in the void to his left. Ji Tianxing was startled. He frowned and observed. He soon saw the clue and sensed the majestic and mighty divine might. Immediately, his expression became serious, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Such earth-shattering divine might far surpasses that of a heavenly god or even a godly lord. Only a godly king from the upper realm can do that. Damn it. The backer of the Heaven Punisher wants to interfere? In a short while, Ji Tianxing guessed the answer. He stared at the golden light and lightning without blinking. He thought to himself, it must be Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu. They sensed that planet Heaven Punisher was about to be destroyed, so they used some method to contact their backer. The godly kings from the upper realm spent thousands of years in painstaking efforts to nurture the Heaven Punisher to its current scale. How could they let planet Heaven Punisher be destroyed? It was reasonable for the backer of the Heaven Punisher to save planet Heaven Punisher. Ji Tianxing was not surprised. He had even considered this problem a long time ago. However, he had always thought that under the heavenly Tao, the divine world and the mortal world were separated. Even a godly king from the upper realm could not interfere with the affairs of the mortal world. Just like back then, he was a peak godly king, but he could not interfere with the affairs of the five elements world. Now, the situation had become very special. The backer of the Heaven Punisher wanted to break the barrier between the two worlds and forcefully save planet Heaven Punisher. Ji Tianxing looked deeply at the golden light and lightning. He said in a low voice, I want to see which godly king is the backer of the Heaven Punisher. How dare they ignore the heavenly Tao's rules and attempt to break the passage between the two worlds and forcefully interfere with the affairs of the mortal world? Will they succeed? Are they not afraid of being punished by the heavenly Tao? Ji Tianxing's heart tightened. He stared at the void and waited for the result. If that godly king from the upper realm really broke the passage between the two worlds and saved planet Heaven Punisher, if that was the case, then he had reason to believe that the god realm had undergone an earth-shattering change. His previous views and knowledge were about to be overturned and refreshed. After a long wait, another 30 minutes passed. Planet Heaven Punisher had been devoured by 1/20th of planet Heaven Punisher. Endless dust, gravel, and dregs, mixed with water and lava, gushed out of planet Heaven Punisher and poured into the gravitational sphere. The ground was still cracking, the sky was still collapsing, and the mountains and rivers were quickly disappearing. Planet Heaven Punisher was gradually being destroyed. At this moment, a loud noise that reverberated through the universe suddenly exploded in the void. Kaboom! Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu held their breaths when they heard the earth-shattering explosion. Their eyes widened in joy. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing's brows were tightly knitted as a trace of shock flashed through his eyes. Because the sacred golden light and lightning tore a huge gap in the void in the distance. The gap was 10,000 miles long and 5,000 miles wide. Endless golden light and lightning filled the gap, preventing it from closing. The passage between the divine world and the mortal world had finally been opened. Chapter 2735. Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu felt their blood boil as they witnessed the tear in the void. As expected of the supreme, godly king, he can ignore the heavenly laws and forcefully open a passage between the two worlds. Such means and power can affect the heavenly laws. This is unheard of. My son has such a powerful and heaven-defying master. Why should he worry about not reaching the peak of the divine path in the future? Yin Shuiyin was shocked and couldn't help but exclaim. Tian Shu was also shocked, his blood boiling in his chest. He cheered in a choked voice. Mother, the godly king really did it. This time, not only did he send down divine light, but he also opened a passage between the two worlds. This is the first time in recorded history. No godly king has ever accomplished such a heaven-defying feat. Yin Xian nodded slightly and exhorted. With such means, he's probably a first-rate overlord among the many godly kings in the god realm. Tian Shu, to be favored by the godly king is the greatest blessing in your life. You must cherish it. When you ascend to the god realm in the future, you must follow your master and serve him like a father. There was a subtle change in Tian Shu's expression as he muttered to himself. Father died not long ago, and mother said this. Could it be that father isn't the most important person in her heart? Although Tian Shu felt a little awkward. But he also understood that his empress mother wanted him to hug the big tree that was his Scherzoin. He quickly put the matter aside and looked expectantly at the gap. He asked, "Mother, since the godly king opened the passage between the two worlds, will he descend soon? As long as he descends to planet heaven, all disasters will be eliminated. Ji Tianxing and his accomplices will also be easily killed by the godly king." Yin Shuiyin thought for a moment, then shook her head and explained, "Tian Shu, things aren't as simple as you think. The godly king must have used all his strength to open the passage. How could he descend to the mortal world? At least, the godly king's true body can't come to the mortal world. My guess is that the godly king would at most send down a projection of his avatar. That would be fortunate." Tian Shu was a little disappointed and asked, "Even if it's just a projection of His Majesty's avatar, he can still destroy stars with a flick of his finger. Killing Ji Tianxing and the others would be a piece of cake. Moreover, His Majesty the Divine King can't descend into the mortal realm, but he can send the divine monarchs and heavenly gods under his command to help us." Yun Shuiyin shook her head again and said with a wry smile, "Silly child. If even His Excellency the godly king cannot descend, what qualifications do those godly monarchs and heavenly gods have to descend?" "All right." Tian Shu was a little disappointed. He nodded and mumbled to himself, "I hope Master's clone is strong enough to save Heaven Fa Star." Meanwhile, Ji Tianxing also witnessed the emergence of the passageway between the two worlds. His expression became extremely gloomy, and his heart was filled with shock. "In the end, I underestimated the Heaven Punisher race's backer. He's even stronger than me in the past. He decisively went against the will of the heavenly Tao and broke through the passage between the two worlds. Such means had long surpassed peak divine kings and already came into contact with heavenly Tao rules. Who is it? What on earth did those god kings experience in the 1,000 years after my death?" Ji Tianxing's emotions were very complicated. At that moment, he recalled what Yun Yao had said to him not long ago. Yun Yao had told him that she had a bad premonition and could even see the future. The upper realm's gods had interfered, and everyone's ending was miserable. At that time, Ji Tianxing did not believe it. However, now that it had happened, he had no choice but to believe it. When he thought of this, he could not help but sigh. Times have changed. The current world is no longer the same as it was in the past. I should have known that the Heaven Punisher race's backer could avoid the heavenly tribulation and influence and destroy heavenly Tao rules. Now, it's reasonable that they can open the passage between the two worlds. I just don't know which godly king will descend after the passage is opened. Or will he send a clone projection? Ji Tianxing was very clear about the godly king's divine powers and methods. He was not worried that the godly king would send a large group of heavenly gods or godly monarchs to descend, because that was simply impossible. Even the godly king's true body could not descend to the mortal world. Even so, Ji Tianxing still had to prepare in advance. If the godly king sends a clone, with my current strength, I'm definitely no match for him. Even if he saves Planet Heaven Punisher, there's nothing I can do. I can only leave this place first. Of course, Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to leave. He still wanted to see what the godly king was going to do. How was he going to save Planet Heaven Punisher? It would not be too late for him to leave this place after everything was over. Planet Heaven Punisher flew faster and faster. 1/10 of the area had already entered the gravitational circle. The sky and earth in that area had collapsed, turning into endless debris and dust that was swallowed up by the gravitational circle. A huge gap appeared in the huge Planet Heaven Punisher. Monstrous magma and fire gushed out of the gap, burning all living things. The core of Planet Heaven Punisher was also pulled by the violent gravitational force, becoming extremely irritable and unstable. Countless cracks appeared on the surface of the planet, and the remaining 3 continents kept collapsing. Under such a terrifying disaster, ordinary Heaven Punishers had no chance of survival. Large numbers of them died. Only a few martial gods were able to escape from Planet Heaven Punisher. It seemed that the continents on Planet Heaven Punisher were unstable and would soon fall apart. At this moment, The huge gap in the void suddenly lit up with an incomparably dazzling golden light. Roar! An angry roar that reverberated through the universe and shook the heavens suddenly came from the passageway between the two worlds. Then, a huge golden palm that covered the sky and covered the sun stretched out from the passageway. The huge golden palm streaked across the void at the speed of light and pressed down on Planet Heaven Punisher in the blink of an eye. That's right. It was pressing, not slapping. The huge golden palm pressed down on Planet Heaven Punisher's gap and unleashed a godly might that covered half of the planet. It also pushed Planet Heaven Punisher out of the gravitational circle. Bam! Following a muffled explosion, golden light fragments burst out of the giant golden palm, filling the sky with golden light fragments. The gap in the heaven-punishing star also exploded into thousands of ravines that spread in all directions. What shocked everyone even more was that Planet Heaven Punisher, which had been flying at a high speed, suddenly slowed down. The Heaven FA star pushed the giant golden palm forward for 3 million miles before slowly coming to a stop. No matter how the black hole pulled, Planet Heaven Punisher trembled. It was blocked by the huge golden palm and was unwilling to move forward. 2 short breaths later, a dignified, cold shout came from the passageway between the two worlds again, shaking the universe. The huge golden palm once again unleashed its godly might and pushed Planet Heaven Punisher out of the gravitational circle.